Chair McMillan, you can go ahead and start. We're live.
All right, thank you, Becca. I call to order the May 2021 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University's Board of Regents. And good morning, everyone. Thanks to everyone who's joining us this morning. Everybody's remote using the Zoom technology from the board, and thanks to all of members of the public and the university community joining us via the live stream video. First item of business today is to welcome our two student representatives, Sia Butar and Rodrigo Tojo Garcia. And you're both from the Twin Cities campus, so welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us today. And with that, we'll jump into the first of several items of business and a couple action items towards the end for us. And the first one being our recommended 2022 annual capital improvement budget. And I invite President Gable and Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Bertelsen to walk us through the proposed annual capital improvement budget. And we put about 20 minutes together for this, but it's an important item, so we'll do what we need here. President Gable.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and good morning, everybody. So just to kick it off, as part of Board of Regents policy, the administration is directed to develop a capital budget with a 6-year time horizon that we also update annually. The capital budget you're about to hear about includes the projects that are ready to proceed into design and construction. We'll be back in the fall with the full 6-year capital plan for your consideration, just to set the context. So members of the committee, the total fiscal year 2022 capital budget is $521 million and takes into account our state capital request, which includes over $295 million in state capital request projects, including $200 million in urgently needed HEAPR funding for capital renewal. It also includes full funding for the chemistry undergraduate teaching lab facility and design funding for the UMD science building renewal. As the legislative session nears an end, state lawmakers are engaging in negotiations on a capital investment bonding bill that would fund critical infrastructure projects across the state, including these buildings and these investments into the University of Minnesota. A capital investment into the university is an investment in our state. It invests in Minnesota students who become workforce ready graduates and leaders. It's an investment in discovery, in research, in cures by our world-class faculty who transform our state and society. It's an investment in entrepreneurship and innovation, in critical infrastructure. It shores up our buildings while putting money directly into the hands of local contractors who can do the work on projects across all of our campuses. So we very much look forward to the legislature and the governor's action in this space. But in the meantime, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll turn it over to Senior Vice President Myron Franz and Vice President Mike Bertelsen to discuss this project and budget in more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, President Gable. Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Bertelsen, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, President Gable. If we'll go to the next slide, please. As President Gable mentioned, this is a combination of action here, and we want to make sure that we provide you with the opportunity to review and discuss this recommended capital improvement budget for fiscal 22. So we will be presenting the review of that today, and you will be voting on this in June. But yeah, as President Gable mentioned, this is another one of those items that is obviously in a delicate situation in terms of understanding what's happening in the legislature with our 2021 capital request to the state legislature and to the governor. But I think what we want to do today, and Vice President Bertelsen will walk you through the details, is provide you with the overview of the capital improvement budget. So this fall, we'll go into more detail about some of the different plans and ideas we have for the overall capital plan for the 6-year plan. But one of the things that's so critical during this particular phase is to make sure that we have the kinds of projects that are ready to go, ready to be funded, and to move on with the board's approval in June. One of the things that the HEAPR, the Higher Education Asset Preservation and Replacement Fund, is a critical component of what we do at the university. Now, we're also going to include some some items that we have on our list of potential new items. One of the things that happens over time is this list changes. Right now, we're presenting you with our recommended 2022 capital improvement budget, but we will also be exploring and investigating other issues that may come up during the year. And we'll give you a list or preview of what those items are as part of the presentation. So if we could go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Chair, if that's okay, turn it over to Vice President Bertelsen.
Thank you.
Good morning, Regents and Chair. This slide is a breakdown of the broad categories of the annual capital budget. As you can see, we rely on the state for a substantial portion of our capital funding, a little more than half for our fiscal year 22. Next slide, please. The annual capital budget represents year one of our 6-year plan. It includes individual projects greater than $1 million, as well as approval for pools of R&R, which is repair and replacement, and HEAPR, the state-funded acronym for Higher Education, Asset Preservation and Replacement. These resources fund many facility renewal projects. The annual capital budget authorizes major projects to move into design and construction this coming fiscal year. Anything appearing on the list must have completed pre-design and be fully funded in order to be included. Next slide, please. One major point of information regarding the budget document before you today is to remind you that the university's practice at the May Board of Regents meeting has been to include the full value of the university's state request when the final outcome of the state bonding bill is not yet known. Projects included in the current state capital request are detailed on the next slide. Next slide, please. We reference these are the projects included in our calendar year 2021 state capital request, which the board approved in December of 2020. The state request represents 57% of our overall FY22 annual capital budget. Next slide, please. There's certainly a lot to look at on the slide, but it is central to understanding our facility renewal needs. Facility renewal is a recurring, consistent, and very predictable problem. Our building systems wear out over time, as they will, and routine investment is essential to maintain these critical assets. What this chart illustrates is that we rely on largely unpredictable sources of funding to meet this, that is HEAPR and the state capital request. The two gray lines represent facility renewal targets. The lower gray line represents minimal funding to not lose ground on our facility upkeep. And the upper gray line is the target to actually make progress on reducing our $4.8 billion facility renewal need. Annual stewardship, or the maroon bars, represent HEAPR and R&R funds. Annual asset reinvestment, or the gold bars, represents all other facility renewal, such as projects funded by the state capital request and university-funded renovations. Some may look at our state capital request, which I showed on the previous slide, and say that $200 million in HEAPR plus major renovation projects is asking for too much. But this chart shows that it puts us right where we should be each and every single year in order to keep pace with our aging facility needs. In the next few slides, we'll review the major pieces of the annual capital budget. Next slide, please. The first item and largest single category at $200 million is HEAPR. Again, higher education, asset preservation, and renewal. HEAPR's role in maintaining the safety and functionality of our campuses cannot be overstated. The university takes its facility stewardship role very seriously, and though buildings provide beautiful architecture and help define our campus, their purpose is to support our teaching, research, and service mission. This requires safe, reliable, and technically capable facilities. HEAPR and R&R play a critical role in providing faculty, staff, and students with the facilities necessary to productively learn, care for patients, and conduct research. HEAPR is the single largest source of funding available for making the mundane but vital capital improvements to our campus buildings and our infrastructure. The tagline, HEAPR is cheaper, is indeed true, is almost always more cost-effective to reinvest in the buildings we already have. New buildings are nice and at times are the needed solution, but when it adds to our overall space, it also adds to our operating cost and doesn't address our existing facility needs. Next slide, please. A number of projects stand alone as line items in the capital budget that collectively total 280 million. This slide lists both the non-HEAPR state request projects as well as the major university-funded programmatically driven projects in this year's budget. Projects and totals will be adjusted in June based upon the outcome of the state capital request. There are a few notable university-funded projects this year. Foremost, the microbial cell production facility, which will be constructed on the St. Paul campus and house the federally supported BioMade Manufacturing Innovation Institute. Also, Lind Hall will undergo a major renovation of spaces being vacated by the English department as they prepare to move into the newly renovated Pillsbury Hall this summer. Next slide, please.
Mike, I might just add, Mike. So
yes, sir.
If you go back one slide, the microbial cell production facility is in the consent report. So the schematic drawings will be presented or are being presented today to the board for review and approval. And this is just for your reference, when you see that later on, this is that project that we're referring to in the consent report. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Myron. The capital budget also includes several university-funded R&R, again, or repair and replacement pools. These are funds that are used to tackle many projects such as elevator upgrades, HVAC and mechanical equipment replacement, parking lot resurfacing, and LED lighting conversions. Next slide. I'd like to make note of a number of projects that you may see added to the capital budget in June or at some point during the coming fiscal year. As Senior Vice President Franz mentioned in his opening remarks, these are projects that we are currently working on, but have not yet completed a pre-design or a financial funding plan.
Yeah, Mike, and then I'll just want to make one note down about 3/4 or 2/3 of the way down, UMTC campus, the Memorial Hall is a new addition to this list. And this is I wanted just to note that this is an opportunity for us to re-envision the use of this building that's right in the core of the campus facility, provide an opportunity for us to rethink how can we make sure that we provide access to research, teaching, and service opportunities that are student-facing in the very core of the campus, as we talked about on the campus master plan visioning the last session or during the retreat. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Finally, this slide provides a summary of all the funding sources for the projects included in the annual capital budget. As a reminder, this includes the full value of the 2021 state capital request. Next slide, please. This concludes our presentation and we are glad to answer any questions. Chair McMillan.
Okay, thank you, everyone. As Senior Vice President Franz noted, this is for review and discussion today and action next month, hopefully with some better sense of where the legislature may be in response to our requests. I have one question and then we'll turn to the committee. Actually, I have two questions, and one's a general and one is a specific. Vice President Bertelsen, that $30 million item for chiller capacity, it's my understanding that is entirely or mostly driven, if not entirely driven, by capacity needs on the Twin Cities or Minneapolis campus, and it is a natural and anticipated build out of relating to our addition of the natural gas, steam, and electric generation capacity from a few years ago. So let me put both questions on the table, and then maybe you come back to that one. The second is, can you remind me and the committee how we go about distributing HEAPR funds? Let's say we got 200 million in response to our request. Is there a formula that helps us determine what will go to Crookston and what'll go to St. Paul and what'll go to Duluth, and how does that work? Because it's been a while since I've focused on that, and with all the new members on the board, maybe there's a quick education opportunity there. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Chair and Regents. I'll answer your HEAPR question first. We do have a formula for allocating whatever HEAPR funds we get. 50% of it is just based on total square feet by each of the campuses. and the other 50% based upon their collective facility condition needs. So as I think the board knows, we do an assessment of all of the facility condition needs for every building on every campus. That gives us a sense of the overall condition of those facilities, and that ratio, that metric is the allocation for the second 50%. And then within each campus then puts together their priority list based upon their needs that we certainly review with the building code office and others in the university. And it's a very collaborative process to put those lists together. As to the chiller, yes, you're right that the $30 million item on the list that would be funded for within the utility rates over time is, and because we have reached a point where we don't have enough sufficient chilling capacity to cool the buildings on the east bank of Minneapolis campus. So this is partly in response to the current condition of our supply and demand. It's also an anticipation of a number of buildings that are under construction, the child development facility, which is under construction now, and hopefully especially when being prepared for the chem teaching building, which will have a significant demand.
Good, thank you for both those answers. Let's see, I've got, while looking at my screen, Regent Powell, then Regent Kenyanya, then Regent Rocha in that order, and I'll look for help from Jason if I'm missing anybody. Regent Powell. You may be muted.
Thank you, Chair. Another sort of education question for Vice President Bertelsen. Can you remind me, and maybe this will help the new members as well, how allocation is decided between the state and the university? So, for instance, the chemistry undergraduate, that building has a very significant state-funded component. The microbial cell production facility, which will be a crucial, really statewide benefiting thing is 100% funded by the university now. So I'm just wondering how do we decide the split between the state and the university for these projects?
Mr. Chair and Regent Powell.
Vice President Bertelsen, thanks.
The standard for the projects that we take to the state as part of the board approved state capital request, the default requirement by the state is the university will pay for 1/3 of the cost and the state will pay for 2/3. So that's the standard for the state capital request, with the exception of HEAPR. HEAPR, the state pays 100% for, and for everything that's not HEAPR, the state funds 2/3 and the university has to pay for 1/3. Our 1/3 sometimes comes from fundraising, sometimes it comes from university sold debt. For other projects that are not part of the state capital request, that's the microbial cell production facility. So that started as an initiative by the College of Biological Sciences as a university initiative and was not part of the state request. And that's why that is 100% funded through the university.
Follow up, Regent Powell. Oh, we lost your audio again, Ken.
Yeah, thank you. Just remind me, can these projects point as it undergoes development, move into the state capital request, or we've decided that will be at the university only?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Yeah, Regent Powell, my screen froze for just a moment. So was your question that do we ever move projects into the state capital request? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's the question. Do projects kind of shift over time as they become more refined and developed?
Mr. Chair and Regent Powell, that is really a prerogative up to a choice that the Board of Regents can make. It typically, it doesn't happen very often. We tend to have lanes by which things get funded. So we tend to sort of line things up. If it's going to be part of the state request, it's we think as you know, the 6-year capital plan, we think multiple years in advance, and projects that are prepared for the state sort of get in line, as you would say, a queue for that. And other projects then outside of that queue need other sorts of funding, but that doesn't mean that the board couldn't make a different decision.
Okay, thank you very much.
Also on this topic, so thank you, Regent Powell, for the questions about how we go about deciding. But on BioMaid, I believe there's at least revenue streams that would help pay for debt service on that building, if not, direct funding. I don't recall all the details of that, but I think some of what originally came to us included the anticipated revenue streams from that would help fund some of that. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's true. There is and Senior Vice President Franz may want to add to this, but there is, even with the first part of the College of Biological Sciences component, as well as the BioMaid piece, there is a financial planning, which is still underway to become more detailed, but there is a financial plan where there is revenue generated through the production of that facility to cover some of those costs. And that did play into the role of why the university chose to put this forward itself, because there's a revenue production that comes from the sale of what they produce.
Good. We need to keep moving here. Thank you. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and VP Bertelsen. 2 quick questions, both related to potential additions. The first is a more broad one, just in terms of potential additions. What's the criteria? What would have to happen for these to change into actual additions? I imagine it'd be financially related. And then at that time, would that just continue on, or would that come back to the board? Or by approving them as potential additions, are we also approving them possibly happening? And then the more specific question is about the Arboretum access improvement. I know a while back, members of the board, and I imagine the administration as well, there was an email thread regarding some concerns from the immediate neighbors there. And just curious if, I think there was a meeting planned with the community, and obviously, the outcome isn't going to be agreed upon by everyone, but did that meeting at least occur, if I'm remembering that correctly?
Before Vice President Bertelsen probably answers the question on the Arboretum, I think I can field the first one, Regent Kenyanya, a good question. Anything we don't specifically approve today that is on that potential list, I believe, comes back to us before it would go forward. So by looking at the potential additions list, we're not approving any of that stuff formally. It has to come back here. That's my understanding and past practice anyway. If I'm not right about that, let me know, but that would be the way I think it needs to work. So and then on to you, Vice President Bertelsen, for the Arboretum question.
Sure, Mr. Chair and Regent, you're exactly right about the potential addition list. Those are just for information. Those would only come back, and anything we add would have to come back to you as a board, either in June or as a capital budget amendment later in the year. Things that change would be, we kind of sort through whatever challenges we're having in feasibility and completing and pre-design, or finalize a funding plan. And these projects are all missing one or both of those. As to the Arboretum access issue, yeah, there continues to be a lot of work on that conversation. Yes, there was a meeting with the community and continues to be conversations with the city and county and others.
Thank you, VP Bertelsen, Mr. Chair. That answers both my questions.
Very good. Regent Rocha, and then I think, not seeing other hands, we're going to move on. But you have the next question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so, as I'm prone to be distracted by shiny objects, the inclusion of Morrill Hall on the potential list is very interesting to me. And I know it was, what the term was, re-envision building use. That's pretty broad. Morrill Hall's undergone a lot of changes over the last couple of decades in terms of who occupies it. When the board used to be right downstairs from the president that made, there was this, I think, an energy there with respect to that. And what I guess my question is there a plan that would, are we starting to look at developing a plan to dramatically change where the president's office is? I think there's a good case that could be made for it, considering the location of that office and where some of our other leadership assets currently rest. Can you speak anything more to that, SVP Franz or anybody?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Senior Vice President Franz.
And Regent Rocha, I'll start off. And, I think one of the key elements, and this is a lot of the discussion we had at the master planning session too, is how do we envision the core campus? And as you mentioned, this building's had a different history over time. And one of the things we want to make sure that we're thinking about the use of this very, very valuable real estate in the core in a way that is thinking about it in terms of access to students for teaching, research, or student-facing activities. So we're in the planning stages, but we wanted to be right up front with that and put that on the list to let you all know and get your, solicit your ideas and opinions. But the goal really is to engage in a process and to figure out what can we best utilize this space for here, and then secondly, where is the right place to house the administration offices, including the office of the president. So those, as you can imagine, those are. We have a lot of different options around with the footprint that we have, and the key is to make sure that we maintain accessibility and also do it in a way that also thinks about how we want to use space generally. And I'll just take this moment, if you don't mind, Regent Rocha, to talk about, we've learned a lot this last year, both in terms of who needs to be in the office doing what activities, and so our footprint ideas about both from an HR perspective and from a building access perspective are changing over time. And so we want to make sure that we're smart also about how do we use offices in the future, because there's a different concept these days. We need to obviously have meeting spaces because we will, thank goodness, one of these days be meeting in person again. But we also want to make sure that we have a footprint that makes sense to have people using a hybrid model of showing up some days and not other days, so that we don't overuse the footprint that we need. So there are a lot of things going into this discussion actually for Morrill Hall really relates to a bigger discussion about the campus in general. So I wanted to throw that in there too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Regent Rocha,
Thank
follow
you.
up.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very helpful. And, and again, I think that there's a lot of merit in what you're saying. I mean, about the only sort of nostalgic component of maintaining the current use of Morrill is that it's pretty common across the nation, following the Morrill Act. A lot of administrations are located in Morrill Hall. I don't know that that's worth a whole lot. I think that you're right that the location of that facility, of that building, is so central to the campus, and I think there could be some really nice opportunities there for improving student access, whether teaching facilities and so on and so forth. So I would hope that the board continues to be a part of that dialogue, and I'm interested to see what develops. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thanks, everybody, for that report. We'll look forward to an update, perhaps legislative action and action by this committee next month, which keeps us moving here onto another very important topic, and one that builds upon the last time we had Interim Vice President Horstman before us, the cost of, and I'd add competitiveness of, university benefits. So another key discussion item. Where do I see Vice President Horstman? There it is, in about the lower right corner. Why don't you jump in and take us through this? There's a lot of slides here, but Ken assures me he's going to pick and choose and pull the items up that are most important for this committee's consideration. Key topic. Ken?
Thank you, Chair McMillan, regents, and student representatives. I thank you for the opportunity today to discuss the benefits provided to university employees. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Benefits are an important part of the employee value proposition as defined in both the Board of Regents policy on employee compensation and recognition, as well as the policy on employee health benefits. Next slide, please.
There are many benefits for faculty and staff who work at the university, and given today's topic regarding the cost of benefits and the support the university provides in this manner, we will spend our time mainly on medical, retirement, and vacation, holiday, or paid time off. However, the need for the other benefits listed on this slide is critical to providing for the health, safety, and welfare of our employees and their families. Next slide, please. The university has benefit eligibility rules that define what appointments are eligible for participation and when subsidies for medical, dental are available, as well as eligibility for academic disability programs and retirement plans. A 50% appointment provides eligibility to enroll in our health benefits, whereas a 75% appointment provides the university paid health subsidy for those benefits. For faculty in P&A, another threshold is a 67% appointment, which would allow eligibility for the academic disability plan and the faculty retirement plan. Next slide, please. The health plan cost reflects the full cost, both employer and employee paid in total for the most recent plan experience. Currently, the breakdown of this total cost of $264 million reflects a 74.9% contribution by the university, both through the university portion of the premium payment, as well as claims payments. The remaining 25.1% is employee paid, both through out-of-pocket at the point of service and premiums. The amount for retirement represents the university annual contribution to both the state pension plan and to the faculty retirement plan. And the vacation amounts reflect the actual cash payments to employees who have left the university and cashed out under the $10 million figure, or have cashed in 1 week of pay, which under certain circumstances, some employee groups are eligible to do. The larger vacation payment reflects the actual usage of vacation and holiday pay for employees during the past year. Next slide, please. Looking at our employee medical plan overall, we have had a history of providing a health benefit to employees that is more efficient than other public employers. Adjusting for age, gender, dependence, the geography Minnesota lies in regard to healthcare, and the value that we have in our plan and provide, the cost avoidance of our recent and past network strategy, which is a prominent strategy in managing our plan, can be estimated at $13.6 million a year. Next slide, please. The retirement at the university consists of 2 mandatory plans: the MSRS pension plan for civil service and labor represented employees that provides a 6.2% university contribution along with a 6% employee contribution. MSRS estimates that the guaranteed benefit provision to a retired participant at a normal retirement age, excluding Social Security, is almost 60%. Next slide, please. The faculty retirement plan is the main plan for a professional academic and administrative staff, and is competitive nationally, and as we have mentioned in prior presentation, locally is slightly above the benefit offered in the markets we benchmark to, namely local large employers. Next slide, please. For faculty and senior leadership, the market is national, and as we look at other public higher education settings, the faculty retirement plan is actually approximately the equivalent of other offerings across the country. Next slide, please. To summarize, our main retirement vehicles are competitive to the local national markets, in most cases, even with the market. Additionally, we offer 2 voluntary defined contribution plans that have no employer contribution, but allow the option for employees to contribute. This would be the 403B optional retirement plan, which now also offers a possibility of contributing on a Roth basis, as well as the 457B deferred compensation plan. Next slide, please. As we look at vacation, first for civil service and then labor represented, in the early years of work at the university, the overall benefit accrued by civil service and labor represented employees is slightly below market average, but this increases to slightly above or even with the market in later years of employment. Accruals for civil service and labor represented are based on years of service and accrue in minutes per hours worked. There are also annual cash out provisions that can be realized. And when retiring, unused balances can be deposited to the state healthcare savings plan. The option for cash outs applies to 1 week of vacation accrual for certain circumstances, like the inability to actually use the vacation. There are many different models in the market for providing paid time away at present, so developing a comparator can be challenging. For civil service and labor represented, we have looked at local large employer programs to make this comparison. Next slide, please. For P&A employees, it's actually the reverse compared to the prior example. At the start of the career, the 22 days accrued plus holidays is actually higher than what we see in the market, but as a P&A employee progresses in their career here, the market catches up and then eventually surpasses what we currently offer. This has been a topic for conversation as we review the vacation policy in light of the accrual limit of 176 hours and the fact that over the past year it has been more challenging given hiring freeze and RIOs for individuals with this vacation policy to take their vacation. Next slide, please. Faculty and senior leaders similarly lead the market in about the first 10 years of their employment, and then gradually the market catches up. For senior leadership comparisons, this topic is a little more challenging to find a consistent comparator given the nature of executive benefits in the market and nationally, even in the public domain, and a certain lack of transparency in accessing that information at times. Next slide, please. As we look at our comparison to the benefits of large Minnesota employers, our core benefit program together is above the market average in Minnesota. This primarily is driven by the value of our health plan and the support the university provides to that health plan, and also incrementally by the value of the faculty retirement plan. Next slide, please. It is also important to realize, as we often mention, that there are intangible benefits beyond those foundational ones we are discussing here today. And many of those involve the mission of the university, as well as relationships and life balance. Next slide, please. Many of those intangible benefits that employees individually seek in their career are listed here in the gold section of this slide. Next slide, please. As I finish, I'd like to speak to perhaps some future benefit trends. They do hold the potential for a significant shift in what benefits are provided and how. During the past year, our plan saw a 1,000% increase, for instance, in the use of virtual healthcare appointments over the prior year. We do not see this level of use continuing as we return to some sense of normalcy, but neither do we see the small number we had experienced prior to 2020 being maintained. It will be somewhere in between. Mental health continues to be a topic that challenges network access, available providers, and appropriate levels of advocacy for both employees and their families. And new technology and approaches to managing this very important issue of health benefits will take on more space, as it should, in the strategic planning of future benefits offered. Health plan designs will adjust to more competition in the state of Minnesota, given the entry into the market of larger for-profit vendors and administrators. A focus on guidance and support that connects members with the right resources the first time will involve new technology, potentially including AI, to anticipate members' needs through predictive modeling. The managing of high-cost claim experiences and specialty drug formularies continues to be a challenge, as it has been. The university currently has a periodic, multiple times a year, robust clinical review process in place for our pharmacy benefit vendor that also is done in collaboration with expertise out of the College of Pharmacy. We also, in that process, look at the medical formulary, which are drugs paid through the health plan benefit, as well as specialty drugs. And in regard to specialty drugs, we support the care and compliance of our patients on our health plan through the use of the Fairview Specialty Pharmacy vendor relationship. Generational shifts in employment and part-time employment will drive a need for different types of benefits. Examples may be some type of student loan support, caregiving leave and support. Employers likely will come together as a community, as they often had in the state of Minnesota, to collaborate on the potential for portable benefits for a future contingent workforce, which really isn't in the future, it's already here. But the idea of employers sharing the employment of a contingent worker and allowing that worker to have an ongoing benefit platform is attractive. As a significant portion of the population heads to retirement years, the need to address this on a retirement plan platform through implementation of such strategies as a deaccumulation strategy for retirees will grow. And in fact, our retirement plan governance committee, with a much diligent work on the part of Andrew Parks and Chris-Ann McMahon and Investment and Banking in the HR office, has started to consider this strategy. This will allow retirees to continue to use our retirement plan during their retirement years and have an appropriate strategy for their life. We also will need to think differently about senior healthcare and support for senior retirees, as the individual market platforms for these products provide a much more competitive selection experience for a retiree, combined with counseling expertise embedded in the platform that is focused on a holistic approach to senior living wherever they may live internationally or in our country. And with that, Chair McMillan, I will end and am available for questions.
Okay. Nice job covering a fair amount of ground there on some, well, a huge part of where we spend our money and how we attract and retain, recruit, and keep and promote employees across all ranges. So let's see what the committee would like to cover. I see Ken's hand up already, so let's start with Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, Mr. Horstman. The first one has to do with the. Well, first of all, thank you for a very good overview, and this is a good benefit program. I'm curious about the funded status of that Minnesota State Retirement System, which is a crucial part of the benefit that we offer. And if you could just give us a little bit of information on how that sits and whether there are any big funding needs that we see going forward. So that's the first question. The second one has to do with, you mentioned portability, and I would just concur with you that certainly for new employees, my own learning is that portability is really important, and that offering new employees a choice between for instance the state retirement system or a totally 401k structured system, even if that 401k pays less, the opportunity to take it with them is really desirable. So I appreciate your comments on that. And then the last question has to do with childcare, which you didn't mention, but I'm just wondering how you think about access to childcare in the whole sort of benefit menu. Thank you.
Chair
Horstman, go ahead. Three questions there.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Powell. Those are very good questions. As you may be aware, MSRS and the legislative body that reviews pensions spent a good part of the last 3 or 4 years discussing how to address the fact that Minnesotans on this plan were living longer and needed more support, and that in some cases, the population supporting them was a little less than in past years, obviously, as more people go into that retirement zone. It took about 3 years to make the adjustment, but our current contribution of 6.25% and then 6% for employees reflects a change to support that and address the funding challenge that had been observed. I don't have immediate detail on where it sits today, but I think the intention when doing that was that the MSRS will have to come back to this topic in the future again and stay on top of it, because there were some other options that required funding beyond the 6.25%. In regard to portability of retirement, certainly our faculty retirement and optional plans can be taken with individuals. MSRS can be if you're going to other public employers in our state very often. But there is not necessarily a choice to take one plan or the other. It is entirely based on whether you are a civil servant or part of a labor represented group. You would then receive MSRS. If you are faculty in a senior leader position or P&A, you are part of the faculty retirement program, which is a 401A, which is probably a weedy for this discussion, but that is what allows us to have these additional optional plans that people on the faculty retirement plan can use, as well as people who are civil servants and in labor. In regard to childcare, I did not mention that, but that is generally, as I speak to items like caregiving leave, not just for children, but for elderly parents. That is a benefit that has started to evolve, especially over the past year. As a university, we put in our own emergency paid leave to address the immediate pandemic need. But I think as we have networked with other employers in the Minnesota area, as well as nationally, we see finally a movement toward addressing this and providing more support for employees, especially as we possibly, as SVP Franz mentioned, move into perhaps a different time and space arrangement for work. The child care, family care topic will become a more regular discussion and will evolve as an employer support mechanism as well as a benefit, I believe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, VP Horstman. Let's go to Regent Rocha and then Regent Swiggum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we can go to page, I believe it's page 56. It says retirement P&A at the top of the page. The third bullet says the university provides 2.7% more than companies that provide both a matching and non-matching component to their defined contribution plan. Is that reflected in the bar graph down below, the difference between the 7.4% and the 10%? Am I understanding that right?
Regent,
Horstman.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Rocha. I'm dialing up the page right now here. Yes, it is represented in that conclusion, and what this translates to is that the contribution provided by the university on average, when we compare it to local employers in Minnesota that are large and jumbo employers, is on average about a 2.7% contribution higher. That isn't necessarily a direct correlation to how that might close someone's pay gap who might be a little behind market, but it is incrementally translates to that to close the gap a little bit. So we are slightly ahead on our retirement contribution when compared to local large employers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may.
Regent Rocha.
So when I first saw that, I was wondering whether it was if it's 2.7% more, or if it's 2.7 percentage points more.
It's,
And based on,
sorry.
Vice President Horstman. Oh. Regent Rocha, finish your question. Sorry.
well, and based on the bar graph, it looks like it's percentage points, which actually probably reflects more like a 30%. The 30% more than the other contributors. Am I right in saying that?
Vice President Horstman, maybe you can clarify there.
Yeah. Regent Rocha, you are considering that accurately. This was put together sort of in a holistic sense to not only look at this, but also our salary to market. And so this is a contribution differential of 2.7% contribution of salary. And then what we did in our February presentation was translate that into what incrementally that would do to any gaps to market salary. So you are right. If you look at the 10% contribution, the average DC contribution is 7.4% or a little under that. So it's approximately a 2.7% contribution difference.
And Mr. Chair?
Yeah, one more follow-up, Regent Rocha.
Yeah, thank you. Just a brief editorial comment. This is one of the toughest things to try, I think, to digest as a member of our board. I mean, for one, obviously in the private sector, you can have discussions about compensation and benefits without necessarily the bright light, and oftentimes that people talk about being reserved in our compensation and benefits, that there's something more from that other than just trying to balance the different challenges that we have as an institution from a financial standpoint. We find ourselves comparing ourselves with other institutions of higher education, but we also find ourselves competing against this particular labor market. And so it's just extremely complex, and at times we talk about where we rank in salary, and other times we talk about where we rank in benefits, and other times in a total package. And so, to be able to really get our arms around this in a brief dialogue like this, I think is extremely difficult, especially in a public setting, for fear that more is taken from the desire to be conservative in how we address these things, because of course this affects how we relate to what we need for tuition, what we need for state funding. There's just a whole lot going on here, and so I appreciate the presentation to help us have somewhat of an understanding. But this is a really complex dialogue that has to continue over time, and I think I would love to see us spend a lot of time, more time on this conversation, just because it has such a huge impact on virtually everything else that we do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. And we were trying to be thoughtful about coming out of February with a broader look at total comp and benefits, and then diving into this piece on benefits. But you're right, there's never quite enough time to fully illuminate the complexity of the issue. But one more question here. We're going to go to Regent Swigum, and then we need to get going here and plow through the rest of our agenda.
Mr. Chairman, kind of a follow-up or maybe an enhancement of Regent Rocha's question. I would like to ask a question of Ken I have it on slide 18. I don't know if that's where you have it, Ken, but it would be the comparison of benefits to large Minnesota employers.
Okay.
Can you pull that up?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I know what slide you're talking about. So.
Okay. And my question is, of course, appropriate compensation of our university employees, our good employees, is very, very important. We need to consider that as we look ahead to this next year in a significant way. But I remember, and my memory might be wrong, but I thought in February, we talked about the total benefit package of that university employees receive as compared to public employees or other public employees or private employees within Minnesota, that we were 4% better.
Yeah.
It looks to me on that slide that we could actually be, when you include all the benefits, 21% better than benefits to comparable large employers in Minnesota. Is that correct? Is it 4% that I remember from February, or is it 21% as we look at the future, what we need to do?
Vice President Horstman.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Regent Sviggum, thank you for that clarifying question. This lens today is strictly based on the core benefit program. And what it is saying, as you noted, is that our total benefit program is 21% above the benefit offering of other employers in the state. What we did in February was translate that into sort of an apples to apples comparisons to get an idea of how that would impact salary. So we included that to see how much more competitive that might make a salary for someone who may not quite be at the market median. And it wasn't 4%, it was around what we thought was approximately a 6-point bump on whatever the compa ratio that might have been discussed at that point would be. So for instance, if you are at 86% of the market in pay with our retirement plan and our health plan here in Minnesota, that might bring your compa ratio up to 92%. If we were comparing it and including the other employer benefits and just saying how much more our benefits provided. But it's not a one for one when we look at it through this lens. This is solely a benefits metric here.
I see. So if I could, Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up, Ken,
Yes,
so I understand, just quick follow-up. Would it be fair, and of course, it varies upon employee, I assume. It varies upon employee, it varies upon who we're comparing ourselves to. But in general, would it be fair to say that our employee benefits value, the value of the benefit, just the benefits package, we're somewhere in that neighborhood of 21% or 20% more value to an employee. But when put to the entire package of compensation, it's more in the neighborhood of 6 to 7%, as opposed to the 4%, which I forgot. I didn't remember quite well.
To that comparison to large Minnesota employers is accurate. It might be slightly different for a comparison to public employment, which we also looked at in February, and in the future we could sort of bring that back into this discussion. But you are correct in how you've concluded that assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ken.
Yeah, good discussion. And I think for members of the board, new members of the board that weren't present for February, that compa ratio conversation and all the elements that lead to that is really the right starting point. And then things like this have to be added on, and addressed. And sometimes it's simple addition, sometimes it's apples and oranges, but both Regent Rosha and Regent Sviggum are raising good points. But maybe there's a way where we can bring that back for the full board in this committee at some point in the 2022 academic year, because this piece without that piece could leave you scratching your head. Anyway, we need to move on, and appreciate that. Vice President Horstman, nice job covering a swath of territory there, and good discussion. Item 3, again, another item for discussion, no action today, but another vitally important item is an update on our annual operating budget, our 2021 annual operating budget. And a couple notes from me at the outset. Normally, we would not receive an update on a current year budget at this late point in the year. We'd be beginning to focus on the next year, the upcoming budget, but given all the fluctuations that we experienced this fiscal year, and in talking with Senior Vice President Franz and Associate Vice President Julie Tonneson as we built this agenda, we felt it was really important to ensure the committee had an in-depth update before we turn in June to the 2022 biennial operating budget. And we also wanted to make sure everybody really clearly understands the impacts, the restrictions, the consequences and the current status of federal funding that the university has. Some of it they have received, some of it we remain anticipating. And anyway, there's lots of interest and attention on that. So that's the purpose of this discussion. And you'll recall this time last year, we were beginning to build a 3-part COVID adjusted budget that ultimately came together in June and July. So this was not a normal budget year, and obviously, understatement of a lifetime, not a normal operating year for anybody. That's why we thought stopping, capturing where we stand today on 2020 or 2021, and then next month turn to 2022 might be a helpful way to tackle this. So I think Senior Vice President Franz is going to start, and then Vice President Tonneson will walk us through the majority of this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for bringing up the slides. If we can go to the next slide. I think the key really here, as Chair McMillan mentioned, there are 3 purposes we really have to achieve here, and that is to give you the most recent updates on the fiscal 21 budget process, make sure we incorporate how we're using the federal relief funds and how we're anticipating using the federal relief funds. By the way, we are still literally getting guidance. That was just several days ago. We got pages and pages of guidance, and it tends to be consistent with what we thought and with some added restrictions, but nonetheless, a changing dynamic, which is always hard to budget when the rules literally are changing or not even in clear to you at the point. And obviously, this is a lead into the fiscal 22 budget presentation we'll make in June. But I want to start off by saying that we owe a debt of gratitude to Vice President Tonneson and all the folks who work in the budget area. This has been an unbelievably tough year. When you think about the number of times we've had to review, revise, reconsider, analyze the information, the data, as it's literally changing on a month-to-month basis, both on the auxiliaries of the parking and the dining and housing, as well as the athletics. These numbers never stayed static, and they still are moving. And I think in a normal year, as you mentioned, Chair McMillan, we have the opportunity to think about what we're doing and make sure things are consistent and tuition numbers are what we think. But literally every number on the page in front of Vice President Tonneson and her team is changing. And so I want to thank her for the work that she's done, and thank all the people who support the budget process at the university, because there's been an awful lot of work by everyone, all the different units, the support units, the academic units. And it has not been a normal year, and we're not sure what next year is going to come to either. So as a prelude to fiscal 22, we're making some assumptions now about what's going to happen in fiscal 22 that we don't know for sure it's going to happen. So as much as I want to assure you we know what we're doing, we do, but what we're saying is underneath our feet, literally the ground is changing. And so we wanted to give you the most recent data. And one of the things that's been sort of frustrating as well has been the public perception of the federal funds and how they're used and what we're using them for. We made a tremendous effort this last year. All of you have done this before I even joined last year, is to really think about how we manage the cost, the short-term costs, made changes in our budgets, used our resources at the university wisely so that we could, with the help of the federal aid now, do as much as we could to solve the deficits of fiscal 2020 and fiscal 2021. So we haven't asked the state for additional money for those 2 years as a result of the pandemic. And we're asking them now, as you know, for our state appropriation for fiscal 22 going forward. So it's really important that we walk through these concepts and make sure you all feel comfortable with them as we go into the fiscal 22 budget in June. So with that, Vice President Tonneson, I'll let you take over the next slide, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As Senior Vice President Franz just mentioned, we did do some additional analysis this year that we don't normally do in the current year. And as we discussed first in October and again in December, we actually met with units in the fall and then circled back and touched base again in March to project any significant variances from the scenarios we anticipated for this year's COVID adjusted budget. So we reviewed all potential COVID-19 impacts on their unit operations. Importantly, we have now been able to incorporate final official fall and spring enrollment information to project our tuition revenues, We have also reviewed other revenues impacted by a change in the operations, things like events and ticketing, educational sales, clinical income, auxiliary sales, and so forth, to determine how their projected totals for the year differ from what would be considered a kind of normal budget to actual variance. And we reviewed any significant expenditures related to making the campuses safe and the classrooms operate effectively under our new guidelines, spending that's directly tied to responding to COVID-19. Finally, after analyzing budget issues driven by all of these factors, we again assessed where any natural spending, kind of quote, natural spending has decreased with reduced activities, and how much the furlough temporary pay reduction program, or TPR program we put in place, will generate in savings for each of the units. I do want to be clear, for this exercise, we limited our review and analysis to only variables impacted by the pandemic. If a particular unit had a structural imbalance or a budget challenge prior to the pandemic, this analysis kind of set that aside. We're not attempting to define for you all of the negative and the positive things that are going on in the budget as they happen every year. Instead, we've worked hard to isolate this review to the significant impacts of the pandemic that need to be addressed to provide a definition of the shortfall that is accurate and, we believe, responsible. For example, there are known costs some units have incurred that are not included in the total shortfall number we are sharing, because we also know there were natural expenditure reductions in other areas of their budget that provided kind of an in-house solution automatically to that spending. So this is not necessarily a gross revenue loss or a gross shortfall. In many instances, it is a net shortfall to get to the bottom line issues that we need to address through our decisions at the institutional level. So next slide, please. We can now report on the updated results of that analysis. The estimated shortfall, as we've defined it, is $172.5 million. The changes from December are actually slight. First, the total tuition shortfall remains close to our earlier projection. I will say that the estimates by unit within that total have changed more significantly in some cases, but overall, where we were estimating a shortfall compared to budget of $15.8 million in December, we have now revised that to $15.5 million. The most striking finding remains that 76% of the projected shortfall for the institution is isolated in our auxiliary operations. That includes Gopher Athletics and housing, dining, and parking throughout the system. The situation for those units has worsened a bit from our earlier estimates and is now responsible for $130.5 million, or roughly 85% of that $154.5 million projected loss in the other revenue activities. And that is after factoring in natural and forced cost reductions in those units. The remaining $24 million in that other revenue category has remained stable since December and is related to reduced educational sales, some clinical income, and other external sales associated with things like the Bell Museum, study abroad, commodity sales, childcare center, so on and so forth. The final result also includes $2.5 million in projected spending across many units for cleaning protocols and facility accommodations. This only reflects relatively large expenditures outside of auxiliaries, and as I mentioned a moment ago, reflects expenditures that were not already covered through natural spending reductions elsewhere. Slide, please. So the $172.5 million is what remains as a shortfall that needs to be addressed by the institution by asking, how should we apply the tools that you see listed here? It's important to know that as we review the unique revenue and cost situations across the units, we will also apply these solution options in a unique way for each of those units. For some of them, we can stop at the use of their own furlough TPR savings because it will fully offset their shortfall. For other units, we will need to go beyond that and ask them to dig further into balances. In some cases, we will make the choice to pull furlough TPR savings from central support units that aren't facing a shortfall and move those one-time dollars to units whose own savings aren't sufficient to address their needs. You've also authorized central reserves to be spent where needed, and we now have the advantage of the federal relief funds. And finally, at this point, we're still planning some amount of loans will be required as we previously discussed. Next slide, please. In total, the updated plan as it exists today involves what you see here. First, the total projected savings from the furlough and TPR program in unrestricted funds only that is available to offset the shortfalls for the units we reviewed through this process is approximately $20 million. Second, we are relying on $38 million of unit level balances and reserves in auxiliaries to address what we believe will be one-time losses. Third, we're planning to move $3.8 million in one-time furlough TPR savings from administrative support units to academic units with need. Fourth, at this point, we are planning to transfer $4.4 million of central reserves to units with need. You will remember that with the FY21 budget, you approved the use of up to $35 million of the estimated central reserves balance at that time. With the use of $22 million of that to close out FY20, there was $13 million of authorization remaining for this year. So this use of planned $4.4 million will bring the balance of authorized spending down to 8.5. So from 13 million available this year to 8.5. We believe it is wise to retain that 8.5 million. So some of the authorization to address institutional pandemic costs not yet finalized for the year. As Senior Vice President Franz mentioned, things are still evolving. We may have additional classroom upgrades and final PPE purchases to close out and to offset actually potentially reduced revenue estimates when we update central reserves. The next column is the new resource available to us, the federal relief funds. To address the FY21 shortfall, we're planning to use at least $61 million, which I will discuss in more detail in the upcoming slides. And then finally, the loan total at this point reflects a revised and reduced estimate of what will be required. Information is still shifting, which leaves us with some uncertainty as of today. Athletics is getting new information from the NCAA and is re-estimating their revenues and expenditures. So while they will still need a loan, the amount is somewhat in flux. Also, while previously we were anticipating the need to implement rather significant loans for our auxiliaries, particularly on the Twin Cities campus, due to the availability of federal funds, those projections have come down. But we feel we need to remain flexible as we move forward to watch the timing of their revenues, as well as the timing of when all the federal funds will actually be available. Slide, please. And with that thought on the federal money, let's move now to a summary of the federal funds and how they have, and we anticipate they will, be used. First, it's important to understand the full universe, if you will, of these federal dollars. There are 3 different federal acts that have and will provide funding to the university. We think about them as 3 different buckets. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act from last spring, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations, or CRRSA Act, signed into law in December, and the American Rescue Plan, signed by the President in March. In each case, the funds are awarded directly to the campuses of the university. They are not funneled through the state in any way. They are one-time, non-recurring funds intended to offset negative financial impacts the pandemic has had on our students and on the institution itself. Each act indicates the minimum amount that must be paid directly to students, and therefore also indicates the maximum amount available for the institution. And as with all federal dollars, we must be ready to respond to audit requirements related to compliance with the law and the Department of Education guidelines. Slide, please. Let me focus just for a minute on the funding for students. With the CARES Act, half of the funding awarded was required to go to students. That was $17.8 million across the system, and 100% of those funds were paid to students before the end of 2020. The second bucket, CRRSA, indicates that we must pay to students the same total dollar amount paid to them under CARES, with one additional small bump due to a change in the formula. So the amount being paid to students under CRRSA is $18 million, and distribution of that began in April. The final ARP bucket is in a bit different place because we are just receiving official guidance from the Department of Education this week, as Senior Vice President Franz mentioned, and we are awaiting final notification of the awards under this act. We are in the phase of really fully reviewing the guidance to make sure we understand how the funds can be used and what the deadlines are for drawing the funds. They are not officially available to us at this point and won't be until the Department of Education enters the awards into their system, and we don't know when that will be. Although the final dollar amount might change slightly from what you see here, the estimate we've received thus far for students is just about $49 million. It is our current understanding that this law again specifies we must spend half of the total award on students. Plus it gives that small bump due to the formula change. In all three cases, we have and will follow the intent of the law and the principles you approved last spring by focusing the distribution to students with financial need. We've done that in a number of ways. It's important to understand that the total dollar amount awarded to the university in total actually stems from an enrollment-based formula, a formula that includes all enrollments but is weighted heavily towards students with financial need, those that are Pell eligible. So keeping that in mind, after designating a portion of the total for graduate and professional students, less than 10%, we have created three categories of aid for undergraduates. For buckets 1 and 2, we distributed the majority through block grants based on financial need. And then second, we designated some of the funding for emergency grant applications in recognition that the financial strain actually will vary by student. And finally, for the second bucket, we also have directed some of the funds to students whose time to degree was interrupted or may have been impacted by the pandemic, and they only need a course or two to finish up. We are reviewing the official notification and guidelines and our understanding of them for the third bucket, the ARP, and we will see if our methodologies will work under that act as well. Note that we cannot in any way dictate how students use the dollars we grant to them, and there are no reporting requirements for the students or the university related to the actual final use of the funds. The intent is that they will cover expenses made difficult as a result of the pandemic. So for things like food, housing, health services, and so on. And for the second two buckets, the law also says students may choose to use the funds to pay any components of the cost of attendance. Next slide, please. Moving to the institutional funds, the landscape is very similar. The CARES funding was $17.8 million. And as we reported to you last October, we used 100% of that to address a portion of the FY20 pandemic related shortfall in our auxiliaries, which I will touch on again on the next slide. Under CRRSA, we now have access to $37.4 million and are planning to use that 100% before the end of this fiscal year as part of the solution I shared earlier for the $172.5 million shortfall. In addition to that 37.4, we are planning to use the ARP bucket toward the $172.5 million shortfall, which I will summarize in an upcoming slide as well. It's relevant to note, as I mentioned before, that the ARP funds aren't available yet. So we need to be flexible in the timing of how and when the federal dollars will align with the shortfall, but we will manage through that over the next several months. I want to emphasize a couple of things here and just really strengthen what I said earlier. First, the federal dollars are one-time, non-recurring, and intended to fill holes in our budget left by the pandemic. And second, the total of the institutional federal dollars we have and expect to receive is not actually enough to fill our holes. So we will not be looking for ways to spend it. I want to move next to refresh everyone's memory on what happened last spring with the first bucket of the institutional federal money. So slide, please. As we reported in October, we ended FY20 with a pandemic shortfall of $65 million, driven by revenue losses from reduced activity and the decisions we made to refund housing, dining, and some of our fees to students. The majority of that shortfall was covered by spending reductions in the units and the use of reserves, both at the unit level and the institutional level. In addition, however, we were able to apply the full $17.8 million of CARES funding toward that $65 million hole. And we also received just over $1 million in other specialized and targeted federal grants for Morris due to its official designation as a minority serving institution and in our clinical units such as Boynton and Cook. Next slide, please. As mentioned previously today, the shortfall picture for FY21, as it covers an entire year of impacts, is more significant. I don't want to repeat everything here on our plan, but I wanted to emphasize that the federal funds are a critically important part of our solution this year, but they aren't the only solution. As we just talked through, our plan is to address the $172.5 million shortfall with really three major categories of tools. And you see them here in their relative significance with the set of solutions. First, university spending reductions and reserves, both at the unit and institutional levels, will offset about 39% of the shortfall. That includes savings from the furlough and temporary pay reduction program, as well as some spending of central reserves and accessing reserves in the auxiliaries. Second, between CRRSA and ARP, as well as some additional targeted grants, the federal fund should cover roughly 35% of our need for this year. And finally, as we have discussed, we're still planning to implement loans to athletics and potentially to auxiliary operations before this is all settled. And that would be the final 26% based on our plans as of today. The numbers I'm sharing today are based on our most recent analysis and estimates. However, please understand there may be adjustment in the total shortfall as we close out the fiscal year, and there may be some shifting between the tools based on that change in the total and the timing of when the revenues can be applied. Next slide, please. Related to this conversation on the distribution and the use of the federal dollars, I want to mention that your consent report today contains an item updating the principles you approved in May and June of 2020 to guide the distribution of the CARES funding. It is really a technical modification to the principles we are asking you to approve today. The original set had language specifically referencing exact provisions of the CARES Act. So we have just updated them to now reference the specific provisions of both the CRRSA and ARP Acts. The substance of the principles has not changed, and you can see that summarized here and reflected in the descriptions and plans that I've just walked through. But with approval of the consent report, those principles are now sort of cleanly attached to the new laws. Slide, please. Finally, today I wanted to spend just a moment to try and link this conversation on the FY21 budget and how it's shaping up to how we move forward and how we will be presenting the president's recommendation for the FY22 budget next month. Kind of provide that bridge and some context for jumping between this conversation and next month. So slide, please.
Important commentary.
I'm sorry, was there a question? I thought I heard something. I'll keep going.
I did too, but I don't know what it was.
Okay, all right, I'll keep going.
Chair, it was me. It was Ken, and I was just commenting that she froze a couple times there, and we just have to watch that because this is, obviously important commentary.
I apologize. Did not know that was happening. Slide that I only have a couple of slides left, so hopefully we'll get through this with no glitches. First, you might recall that in February, when we discussed the spending variables that would be relevant for the FY22 budget, we shared the information on this slide. In addition to the consistent annual cost changes we face related to compensation, facilities, and our technology infrastructure, even before we get to decisions about investments for FY22, we added this item of needing to address ongoing revenue losses from the pandemic, primarily related to tuition. We estimated at the time in February that we would need to plan for approximately $20 million of recurring impact that we would need to address through the framework revenue variables. That includes the state funds, the tuition revenue increases, and/or internal budget cutting and reallocation. What this means is that some of the reduced revenues happening this year will continue into FY22 and beyond, so we will want to address them with recurring solutions. As I've mentioned on previous occasions, because tuition is down this year, even if the numbers rebound a bit this fall, as we are hoping they will do, the revenue changes from last fall's cohort will be with us for years, at a minimum of 2 years for some units and groups, but more like 4 to 5 years for most, and that's a recurring impact. So the FY22 budget will solve for cost increases in FY22, just like it always does, plus this lingering revenue impact from the FY21 shortfall. And next slide, please. As we're building the recommended FY22 budget, we are determining what the final estimated shortfall in tuition is for this year. How close is it to that $20 million we've been talking about since February? But in addition to that, we're also looking for lingering impacts in our other revenues and how long we anticipate them to be down. In many cases, we're expecting FY22 to remain below, quote, normal levels, but to be rising from FY21 as we phase back in or transition to fuller activity levels. In those cases, we will consider the impacts to be non-recurring and thus can address them with different tools. And the same type of question is going on for the pandemic-related expenses as well. Will they continue as part of our normal operating procedures from here on out, or are they one of those expenditure variables that is more volatile and shows up in the annual normal peaks and dips of spending? We will incorporate the outcomes of this analysis into the recommended budget for next year. The RIO program and this year will produce full year recurring savings starting in FY22. So that's one tool available for some units, along with decisions we will need to make to reduce expenditures even further. Then on the revenue side, we will be evaluating potential rate increases where we can and looking for other opportunities we have to grow revenues. And finally, we will return to the use of balances or other one-time resources, as well as one-time drops in spending to address the non-recurring or gradually returning revenues. So we're dealing with multiple issues running on different timelines and kind of multiple tools and options to address those issues. So we believe our best approach is to be nimble and to be strategic in the application of our available resources to where they're most needed. That's what we're planning to do in incorporating the continuing pandemic issues into the FY22 budget. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my remarks, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. And again, you have a wonderful ability to cut through complexity and help us appreciate or help us understand how you're dealing with these big challenges. So I am going to look around here for hands and see if there are some, and let the committee raise their concerns, questions, dig in a little deeper here. I see, we'll start with Regent Rocha this time. We don't have your audio.
Okay, yep, I'm in. I called me earlier than I thought. Okay, so yeah, there's just a lot going on here, and I sometimes wonder how our team is able to keep this all together in this rapid environment. And my question as a member of the board, and one, and I don't know if I'm the only person that gets inquiries generally from the public or from legislative folks about where we are and where we're going. If I understand, Vice President Tonneson, so one of the questions it was just in the article that recently came out on this topic, we appear to have a larger deficit than our peers at Minnesota State. And if I'm gathering from your very clear report, it's really because we have an auxiliary function that is, much more sensitive to what's been going on with the economy and the shutdown of various activities. But outside of that, would you say that we're pretty comparable to where they are? Again, without having, a large Division I athletics program that has a 9-figure budget. But for that, would you consider us to be pretty comparable or possibly even a little bit better shape than our state university peers?
Vice President.
Mr. Chair, Regent Rocha, I will point out a couple of other things I think that are unique or different for us. One is the relative proportion of our enrollment that is non-resident and international, which does have an impact on tuition revenue, more significant. In fact, that is where most of our tuition revenue impact surfaced. And I believe that is different from the Minnesota State system in terms of a proportion of their total. So our tuition impact would be different. The other impact, I believe we are more diverse in the number of sales generating or revenue generating activities that we regularly engage in. So that is just bumps us up a little bit more in terms of when we had to stop doing things and stop selling things, including lab work to companies and all sorts of things, commodity sales and things that people don't necessarily think about when they think about the university. So I think in those would be two additional areas where we have a little bit of a different bump in our experience.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can I ask a real quick follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up, Regent Rocha, and I would guess healthcare clinical services in there too. I think you mentioned that. Probably a big one.
So as research, external research funding has become such an enormous part of the budgets of institutions like ours, has the pandemic and the impact on the economic impacts of the pandemic had any impact on entities that provide funding to our research enterprise? that would have had an impact on us, or has it been pretty much straightforward, business as usual?
Vice President Thomas.
Well, Mr. Chair, Regent Rocha, I would say on the margins, there are impacts. We are seeing from the unit some estimated decrease in their activity this year and in the indirect cost recovery or the reimbursement of administrative expense that comes with that. So we're seeing some reduction this year and actually projected into next year. And then in other areas, we're seeing a bit of a tick up. So it kind of depends on where they're getting their funding and what their work is in terms of whether there's additional funds available. So I think it's a mix, but overall you will see a slight decrease in projected ICR activity, not significant, but some.
Thank you.
Regent Powell and then Regent Mayeron.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Julie, for walking us through some very tough math, and it's really helpful. So the first question I have is we also, had this year our early retirement incentive, and I don't see that showing up as as part of the solution. Are we holding that as as ongoing administrative productivity, and that's so that's going in a separate bucket? So maybe you can just clarify how we're thinking about that money, which is very significant. The second question I have has to do with the student use of the money that went directly to students, and thank you for the explanation of how the kind of the factors. Should we just kind of as a public policy question try to find out through sampling or in some way how that money was used? And I know that's kind of maybe academic or in some ways not that relevant, but it just seems to me it'd be helpful given the magnitude of the fund that we try to really understand where the money went. Did it mostly go on tuition, or was it mostly support, just the, kind of daily living? I think it would be useful to know. And then the last comment just has to do with your explanation of, the ongoing challenges that we'll face this year and our need to hold a $20 million reserve against future losses. Very helpful clarification. Thank you. Those are mine, Chair.
Thank you, Regent Powell, Vice President Tonneson, the RIO program implications, and then I don't know if the others were more comments than questions, but that one for sure. And anything else you want to feedback?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Regent Powell, on the RIO, I would say it's come into play in two ways. First, to the extent that it was implemented this year, so that employees left partway through this year, there would be some salary savings because we also had the hiring freeze, and so people weren't replacing all of those positions right away. And so there would be some savings this year that can apply toward when I mentioned that we have to push into balances a little bit, that's helping this year. But I think more importantly, we have that as one of the tools we have starting next year for recurring savings. And so we are asking all of our units, and you will see this next month, to do some real serious planning on expenditure reductions. And that savings from the RIO will help us address that ongoing loss of revenue plus our cost increases as we move forward. So it's one of the tools we have that's pulling expense out, and we are most definitely using that as a recurring savings starting in the FY22 budget. So that's how the two ways that it's incorporated here. And I will also say that the impact will vary by unit. We have to remember that because not every unit had the same experience in the number of employees that took the RIO or even their salary levels and therefore their savings. So it will vary by unit. And then just a comment on your question about students and how they're spending the money. I will say that we have not discussed about any kind of random sample or anything, but I will tell you that we have to be very careful that we cannot in any way direct the spending of those dollars, that is totally up to the students. And so we can't communicate anything that indicates we want them to use it in a certain way. It's totally up to their discretion. So we have been very careful about any communication surrounding that money.
Yeah, and I fully understand and appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Regent Mayeron.
Thank you. I have two questions. One has to do with, in our materials, it's at page 82, and it's the, sets out the losses, the difference between December and May of this time on the estimated losses for auxiliaries and athletics, where the loss now is being estimated at about 130.5 million. My first question is, what portion is attributable to auxiliaries and what portion is attributable to athletics? And my second question has to do with making sure that I understand that in terms of how we can use or direct the funds that we're receiving from the federal government as a result of these COVID funding, that it cannot be used to reduce tuition. There's some suggestion today in the Star Tribune by the legislature that that some of our legislators believe we can, if we're going to get our request for funding, it should be tied to a reduction in tuition. And as I understand it, their rationales, we can use the money we're receiving from the federal government related to COVID to offset that reduction. I just want to make sure I understand whether we can or cannot use the money that we're receiving from the federal government to address tuition loss.
Senior Vice President Franz or Vice President Tonneson, which one of you wants to field that?
Mr. Chair, let me give Vice President Tonneson a bit of a rest here and just deal with the last part of your question, Regent Mayeron. And it is unfortunate that perspective is out there because in our review of the previous CARES Act and CRRSA and also in the new ARP, it's clear in our review that the monies for institutional use are directed for pandemic-related expenses and pandemic-related losses. And so the ability to use that money to fund a tuition increase or decrease would not be appropriate under our analysis of that law. And the other thing that I think is important to remember too is that, and we've tried to be as clear as we could with the legislature about this too, Regent Mayeron, and that is that the losses that you're referring to here far outstrip the federal dollars that we have in fiscal 20 and fiscal 21. The point that we can take this money and use it for our budgetary purposes for 22 misunderstand the significance of the losses that we have incurred. I should just point out that to have this kind of a loss is not a good situation, and to be in a situation where we're going to have to come up with some loan structure in fiscal 22 to make up for these losses is not the way you want to have your budget end on a fiscal year. So our concern about having loans is that typically you don't want to use loans for operating purposes, right? And so the goal here for us is to provide a one-time solution for some very unusual circumstances. So it once again goes to that point where you really need to focus from the outside world on our fiscal 20 shortfall and our fiscal 21 shortfall, and how those shortfalls really dictate and provide the justification for using federal funds for those losses and for those expenses. I'm sorry if I went on too long about that, but I think I appreciate your question on the use of federal funds.
If I can just make a comment, it seems then that the federal funding is designed to address the past, the havoc that the pandemic has created, as opposed to creating a source for the future. Am I correct?
Mr. Chair, Regent Mayeron, yes, but remember too, there may be some lingering effects in fiscal 22. So as we've talked about and Vice President Tonneson has described, we do not anticipate a return to normal. And so there will be lingering effects. So depending upon when we actually receive the money, which we have not yet, as a fiscal person, I don't like to spend money until I have it, right? And so when we get the money and we have the ability to use that, we do have some flexibility in how we allocate it to the losses in fiscal 21 or going forward. And we'll have to make that recommendation to you in our June budget.
Thank you.
All
But I
right.
don't think I answered all the questions. I'm sorry I got off on that.
Senior Vice President Franz, you tackled a critically important point here, and I'm going to close with my own comment, and that is, while we are in a challenging situation and we need to look at something none of us wants to do, which is loans, I want to commend the administration going all the way back to the development of the COVID adjusted budget and the different elements of that. You know, we had 3 different budgets at one point. The use of reserves, the cost cutting that's gone on, and you know, the federal money without which we'd really be in a pickle here. We are in a pickle, but we'd be in a bigger pickle. And then the use of loans. I think you've managed a monumental crisis well, and Senior Vice President Franz, you frame it correctly. There are big waves ahead that we have to navigate, choppy seas, but this could be a very different conversation with, you know, with ruinous type numbers in front of us, and we're not there. And it would be a remiss on our part as a board not to commend the university for managing, the leadership team for managing us through to this point, so that, thank goodness, with federal money and with loans, you know, we see a path forward. This could be a much uglier situation. So on that note, I'm going to do something we rarely do at the Finance and Operations Committee, and that is call a 5-minute recess for everybody to, you know, refill their coffee, take a break, and come right back here. Let me see. Let me check my time. 11:12. Let's you know, restart at 11:17. Okay. We still got, very good. Thank you, Jason. Before I go to agenda item 4, I want to just acknowledge that I ended that following the discussion with Senior Vice President Franz without going back to Vice President Tonneson for an answer to Regent Mayron's question about the auxiliary athletic split. I don't want to go there right now, but I'd like one of the administration members perhaps to come back and give us that quick math if they could before we end the meeting. So maybe somebody can work on that, because I didn't mean to cut that off, but Julie will pick that up at the right time. So you just stay tuned, and maybe you or Myron signal me when you're ready, and we'll get it between items. For now, though, let's jump into item 4, which is a review, again, emphasize review of proposed amendments to our policy entitled Targeted Business, Urban Community Economic Development, and Small Business Programs. The proposed amendments are the result of our comprehensive review process. And since they impact the finance and operations side of the university, they're routed through our committee for consideration. A natural reaction to seeing this on our agenda might be, why isn't this on Regent Mayron's committee? But that's the way we work at the substantive owner, if you will, of the process manages the review. So joining us today are Associate Vice President Tina Marisam and Sharon Banks, the Director of the Office of Business and Community Economic Development. They're going to walk us through the amendments and highlight the work done on the policy as reported in the FY 2020 annual report on the Targeted Business Program, which is included in your information items. With that, let's see, Vice President Marisam, are you somewhere on the screen? I bet you are.
I am. Thank you, Chairman.
There you are. I see you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank
and
you.
Welcome.
Great. So I'll start by providing some context on the board policy. We can go to the next slide, please. The board policy states the university's commitment to using its purchasing power to promote community economic development. And in particular, the board policy directs the university to run a targeted business program. And here the term targeted business refers to businesses that are owned by women, minorities, or people with disabilities. And there are 2 key goals for the targeted business program that's set forth in the board policy. First, the program aims to promote the university's purchasing from these targeted businesses. And second, the program aims to support equal employment for minorities, women, and persons with disabilities, both in university construction contracts and in the broader community. So this targeted business program applies to 2 categories of purchasing. First, to construction purchasing, and second, to the purchasing of non-construction goods and services. So with that brief background on the policy and its targeted business program, I'll turn to the 4 key proposed policy revisions. Next slide, please. So we first propose a revision to the policy section that describes the targeted business program and construction contracts. And the proposed revision here is intended to better describe and reduce potential confusion about how the targeted business program actually works in the construction context. So the revised language first states the key goal of the targeted business program, which is to provide increased opportunities for women, minority, and disabled-owned businesses to be awarded university construction contracts. And the revised language then more clearly describes a key tool for meeting that goal. In particular, the revised language states that in the bid process for construction contracts with a value equal to or greater than $100,000, bidding businesses will receive points that become part of a total bid score that's used to determine the successful bidder. The revised language then goes on to say that bidding businesses can receive these points for 1, being certified as a targeted business, 2, employing meaningful numbers of women, minorities, and persons with disabilities, 3, entering into subcontracts or supplier agreements with targeted businesses, and then finally, where available, collaborating with the university in programs designed to provide job skills training or promote business development. So that's the first proposed revision, which again is intended to better describe how our targeted business program works. This revision, as well as the other 3 proposed revisions, wouldn't cause any change to how our targeted business program works in practice. Next slide, please. The second proposed revision is to the policy's description of the targeted business program in university contracts for other goods and services that aren't part of construction projects. The current policy language on goods and services contracts is quite general. It states only that the university will provide programs designed to achieve meaningful levels of participation for targeted businesses in non-construction contracts. And we wanted to add detail to this section so that it better aligns with the section on construction contracts that we just discussed, and also to make clear that we have a robust targeted business program that applies to both of these purchasing areas. So the proposed language that you see here is very similar to the proposed language describing the targeted business program in construction contracts, except that the described bidding procedures apply to contracts for goods and services that are worth over $50,000, whereas they apply to construction contracts worth over $100,000. Next slide, please. The third proposed policy revision is a clarification to the section of the policy that describes the university's outreach to small businesses. And the current policy language states that the university will engage in outreach to small businesses in order to implement the provisions of applicable state law. And we wanted to better explain the intent of these outreach programs. And so we proposed revising the language to state that the university will engage in outreach to small businesses in order to promote their awareness of and also their inclusion in university construction projects and procurement efforts. Next slide, please. So finally, the fourth proposed revision is to broaden the policy so that it applies to all of our university campus communities rather than just to our more urban campuses. So as you can see on this slide, the current policy language focuses on the university's role in fostering economic growth in the urban communities of which the university is a part. So for example, the current policy requires contractors to employ meaningful numbers of urban community residents in certain types of construction projects. As another example, the current policy focuses on providing training to urban residents. And we propose removing this focus on urban communities so that the policy will more broadly apply to all of our campuses. And this change will also align the policy with the actual practices of our current targeted business program, which focuses on contracting with women, minority, and disabled-owned businesses, whether they're urban or rural. The remaining changes that you see in the redlined policy are non-substantive and were made to clarify the policy language and make it consistent with the format of other board policies. So that's the information we wanted to share about the policy revisions. I understand that the board is also interested in hearing a brief overview of the annual report on the targeted business program so that you can get a sense of how the university is progressing in this area. Chair McMillan, would you like Director Banks to present this information now, or would you first like to have a discussion on the proposed policy revisions?
Thanks, Vice President Marisam. I think it would be helpful if Director Banks kind of brings to life what this program is by quickly highlighting the report. So it's not just an information item that we do a drive-by on. Instead, we get a little flavor for just what it means in practice. So welcome, Director Banks.
Thank you, Vice President Marisam. Good morning, Chair McMillan, Regents, President Gable, and Senior Vice President Franz. Next slide, please. I'm glad to have this opportunity to present an overview of the university's FY20 report on its targeted business program. This first slide shows the university's spending to targeted businesses from 2015 through 2020. Over these years, university spending to targeted businesses ranged from $71 to $91 million per year. Over $80 million in university expenditures were directed to targeted businesses last year. We are proud that the university is leveraging its spending power to utilize and promote these targeted businesses. We know that although progress has been made, women, minority, and disabled-owned businesses still face barriers that undermine their success, including difficulty assessing capital and networking opportunities, among other things. By doing business with women, minority, and disabled-owned businesses, which are mostly small businesses, the university has a significant impact on the economic health and well-being of our local communities. What's more, the university benefits by broadening its supplier base with targeted businesses, which can create competition among suppliers and promote innovation and the potential entrance of new products and services into the university's supply chain. Next slide, please. Thank you. Total purchasing and construction expenditures for FY20. This slide provides more detailed information about the university's FY20 spending on targeted businesses. Under the heading of construction expenditures, you can see that 30.7% of the university's total construction expenditures went to targeted businesses in FY20. This far exceeds the university's goal of directing 13% of its total construction expenditures to targeted businesses. Under the heading of purchasing expenditures, you can see that 6.2% of the university's total non-construction goods and services expenditures went to targeted businesses in FY20. Here, the university exceeded its goal of directing 6% of total goods and services expenditures to targeted businesses. This 6% goal was established in 2018, and the aim was to improve on the 2 to 3% of goods and services expenditures directed to targeted businesses in each of the previous 8 years. Surpassing the 6% goal within 2 years of its establishment was a major accomplishment for purchasing services and for the university. Next slide, please. Expenditures by protected class. This slide shows the breakdown of total FY20 spending directed toward businesses owned by women, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, and persons with disabilities. You can see that women-owned businesses did the most business with the university, earning around $42 million in expenditures. Native American-owned businesses also did significant business with the university at $21.5 million. Black, Hispanic, and Asian-owned businesses earned from $4.2 to $6.3 million in university spend. We have the greatest opportunity for growth with disabled-owned businesses, which earned less than $1 million in FY20 expenditures. Next slide, please. Our final slide, Targeted Business Report, breaks these numbers down a bit further so that you can separately see construction spending and goods and services spending that went to businesses owned by women, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, and persons with disabilities. You can see that women-owned businesses earned the highest expenditures in both construction and goods and services spending. However, you can also see that Native American-owned businesses did very well in construction spending, but we have more area for growth in the goods and services spending category. Thank you. Our final remarks I would like to make are the Office for Business and Community Economic Development is working hard to grow our targeted business program. This work requires our staff to be visible and engaged in our university local communities so that new suppliers can be identified and brought into the university's supply chain. For example, our office facilitates a very successful University of Minnesota Supplier Diversity Expo as well as other events designed to connect owners of targeted businesses with university purchasing decision makers. We are working to provide education to our university community about our targeted business program so that the purchasing decision makers on each campus understand the importance of the targeted business program to the university and its connection with our communities. We are committed to ensuring the growth and success of our targeted business program and are grateful for the board policy's commitment to this work. That concludes our remarks, and we welcome all of your comments and questions on the policy and the working of the targeted business program. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Banks and Vice President Marisam, for both highlighting the policy changes that we have before us for discussion and review, as well as how this policy in action, what it means. So looking across my screen here for questions, again, not for action today, just for review. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to thank AVP Marisam and Director Banks for this work. I think it's a terrific program, and really, want to recognize and congratulate both of you for the progress. And also, I appreciate the expo and using your convening power. I think that's a really good move. And the comment really is that many, and maybe even most, of the larger corporations, certainly in the metro area, have very similar programs, and that they're very committed to. And the suggestion is that, there may be, using your convening power, just to get a group of mentors and advisors at corporations. I mean, sharing ideas with, folks who are running different similar programs could really be a multiplying factor there. So if you're not already doing that, I would urge you to explore that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving here and go in the order I saw the hands come up, even if it wasn't quite the order they did. Regent Mayron, then Swigum, then Rocha, then Farnsworth, if I got it right. Regent Mayron.
Thank you. A couple questions. So on slide 106, 106 of our presentation, it was the one where we showed compared what was going on from 2015 to 2020. It looks like there was a drop in expenditures for women, minority, and disabled businesses starting in 2017 to the present. Was at a close to 92 million, and then down to around 80 million in 2019 to 2020. So my first question is there any explanation you're able to give as to why those numbers are going down as opposed to what would hope would be up? And my second question had to do with slide 108, and which talks about how we did in 2020. And the question is, how does that compare with pre-2020? And then the third question, it really is for the board to consider. I think about what we see on the consent items, and we have for anything that we're being asked to sign off on the consent agenda for items of construction or goods and services that exceed $1 million. I would personally find it helpful if we also included within those summaries whether the business or the company that was awarded the contract, whether they included or women, minority, or disabled businesses, so that we would get a better sense of how these awards are going out. I know we list, for example, how many companies responded to an RFP, but I think it would be helpful for us also to see which of these awards are going to women, minority, and disabled business enterprises.
All right, a couple questions for Director Banks there, and then maybe one for the board office staff about whether we could get some real-time notifications. That's probably not the right word, real-time, but anyway, Director Banks, you first on the report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, was that Regent Mayron with the question?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The difference between the spend for 2017, 2018 is we had a number of larger construction projects go online, such as the Bell Museum during that time. And so that inflated the general spend of $91 million versus the decrease that we experienced in previous years, as well as the current years. Does that answer your question, please?
Yeah, Regent Mayron did. Thank you, Director Banks. Regent Mayron, was there a second question ahead of the one about whether we could include notifications in our consents? I don't remember, sorry.
Sorry, the second question had to do with slide 108, which
That's
is how these are the 2020 totals and how does this compare with pre-2020 in terms of awards for women and then the various breakouts you did by class.
Director Banks? Thank you, Regent Mayron, for reminding us where you were headed for that one.
Thank you. We are looking for that information. I don't know, Tina, if you can capture that quickly for us. I'm not aware of, can you put the slide up again for that particular report? Thank you.
It wasn't that slide, it was the slide at 108. And I'm trying to get a sense of whether what we're seeing in 2020 is basically reflective of what we've seen in earlier years, as well as to predominant awards by class are going, we're seeing women doing very well. And for example, disabled, very few contributions. So maybe it's slide, I'm not sure on my numbering here. It's either at 107 or 108. There we go. That was the one.
All right, thank you.
So Director Banks, commentary on whether there's trends there or what you're seeing?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Regent Mayron, what we're seeing here is we have a number of women-owned businesses that have actually communicated and partnered with a lot of our general contractors. And as you can see, the Native American number as well, 21 million, was also because of a major construction company that was Native American owned. As far as the other agencies or the other categories within this report, we are working with them to expand their presence on campus, as well as create partnerships that will also expand their inclusion numbers. But those two categories right now have very successful collaborations and partnerships, and that's why those numbers actually are above the other four categories.
Good. Okay, and in response to your third idea, Regent Mayron, I'd suggest rather than we debate that now, we did expand reporting in response to former Regional Mari's request a while ago, several years ago, about how many companies that fit into these categories actually responded to RFPs. So why don't we work with Mr. Langworthy and I with the leadership team and see if there's something we could do there, and we'll dialogue about that informally. I want to keep moving here, and it's Regent Swigham's turn.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Either for Director Banks or Ms. Marsham, out of the $80+ million of goods that were purchased, procurement and or construction in the last year, give me a guesstimate or an estimate of how much that would have taken place had it not been for the special recognition or privilege of the targeted program.
I don't know which of you wants to tackle that. Either one, go ahead. Tina or Sharon.
Thank you, Regent Sviggum. Mr. Chair. I do not have those numbers at my fingertips, and I don't know if Director Banks does or not, but I'd be happy to dig into that and get back to you on that. There's several aspects of our supplier diversity program that can affect this. One aspect is that, all of the work that's done by Director Banks' office in the community to recruit, right, to broaden our supplier base, bring new businesses that may not have done business with the university before into our supply chain. And so that's kind of intangible work that's a little bit harder to measure. The other piece is that businesses that, are certified as targeted businesses or are commit to subcontract or enter into supplier agreements with targeted business can earn some points in the RFP bidding process that can help them get awarded a bid. My understanding is that while this does help businesses, there are still many businesses that are awarded contracts who are not targeted businesses and don't make those types of commitments.
Regent Swigum, follow up there?
Well, I'm not sure I got an answer, Mr. Chairman.
I think she needs to dig in a little more there on the exact number, but
I would be very interested in, Ms. Marsham, you digging in a little bit further to find out how much, at least in a guesstimate. Doesn't, estimate is one thing, but guesstimate, give me close enough for government work type of a number that would have taken place. And then as you're digging in that, could you also then maybe guesstimate or figure out how much more in financial dollars it cost either the university or tuition or cost us to have this special priority program as opposed to just an open bid type process? Obviously, there is some dollars involved here, and I'd be interested in what that cost may be to the university and or taxpayers too.
All right, some homework there, Director Marasam, or I'm sorry, Vice President Marasam and Director Banks. Not sure we can take that further at this point, but thank you, Regent Swigum. I'm going to move on to Regent Rocha and then Regent Farnsworth, and then we're going to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question was sort of on that line. I think it might sort of underestimate some of the businesses that would qualify as targeted to assume that they got the contract because they were targeted. I would assume a lot of those, I would assume the vast majority of those contracts were competitive bids that stood on their own and were awarded as such. Would by any chance, would it be that there were awards made to businesses that would qualify as targeted businesses, but if they didn't identify themselves as such, it wouldn't be reflected in the amount of activity that goes to businesses that have a good, diverse workforce ownership base?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Regent Rocha, that is certainly a possibility. We have a number of women and minority and disadvantaged businesses that prefer not to be classified as a minority-owned company. So that is certainly a realistic possibility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may follow up.
Follow up, please, Regent Rocha.
And I appreciated the chair's comment about Regional Mari's discussion. I think that, for me, one of the most important things is to understand of those who've responded to an RFP, how many people will qualify. And there was a good point made that Director Banks, goes out and tries to find entities that may not have applied or may not have been candidates for RFPs. But it's, if you don't have people that are from certain groups, responding to an RFP, there's obviously not biased if they're not selected because they're not available to be selected. And so I think to me, that's a really important distinction is in terms of the number of bids that we're getting in that real language. I want to talk, Mr. Chair, and I know we're out of time here, but and maybe we can do this sort of in between or outside of the meeting. I'm very interested in the language itself. How the changes sort of interplay. I was trying to find the definition of targeted business within it. I don't know that it was super clear before in the old language, but there's a little part of the distinction of the language is, I think previously it talked a lot about promoting and so on. Now we're moving into some shall provide language. And I'd be very, as a public entity, I'd be very interested in OGC's response to whether they're whether there are any issues that we have to be aware of because when we start taking people's demographic characteristics to make decisions, we can bump up against certain concerns. I want to make sure that we're able to achieve all the upside that we want, but we're also doing it in a fair way that doesn't get us into those kinds of difficulties. But I'll try to maybe formulate those questions a little more clearly and perhaps do it through an email with Director Marasam and Director Banks and OGC to have a better understanding of what the proposed language is. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Regent Rocha. I think that's an appropriate way to move forward. And in addition to the list of people you mentioned, be sure our own Mr. Langworthy's in the mix because this is his specialty. So getting our policy right. Let's see, Regent Farnsworth, and then we're going to go on to item 5.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Very briefly on a few different points on the policy language itself. So the red line policy, I appreciate what Regent Rocha said about some of those details. I do think the definition of the program itself. So in the new, what would be the new section 3 primarily the new section 3 and then some of the other definitions I think are much clearer. Someone who's delving into this policy as a new member of the board for the first time and looking at what was before and what is proposed to be amended. The second point, just in general of the, in response to the review of the program last year and the program in general, I think this is an excellent example of the university living our mission. So I wanted to say that. And then 3, just in response to Regent Mayron's consideration for board discussion and for OBR staff as well about having this analysis as part of things that appear in the consent agenda. I was wondering as we were talking about this kind of where this analysis appears back in front of, for actions in front of the board. And I would just add my support to exploring that. I think that would be very helpful for us in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Our work plans are not static by committee. They're dynamic, and Mr. Langworthy and I'll endeavor to take this a step further with respect to how we handle the consent agenda. So with that, Vice President Marasam, Director Banks, thanks for informing us, setting this up for a good discussion, and looking ahead to review and further review and then action next month. And I think that both of you have a couple of items that you'll be communicating with board members probably through the office of the Board of Regents in the month that lies between. Thanks again. Okay, real estate transactions. We've got a couple here, and let's start with the Murphy Warehouse, and Vice President Kruger, Leslie Krieger, is going to outline a proposed transaction. And I don't know, maybe Senior Vice President Franz wanted to introduce it. Not sure.
Mr. Chair, I would like to do so if that's all right.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Regents. One of the things we wanted to do today, this is another review item, and it's for review, and it'll be presented to the board for approval in June. This is a recommended approval by the president to approve this sale. What I'd like to do is give a little bit of background, and then the Assistant Vice President Kruger will walk through the details. Today, this review, let's go ahead and go to slide 1, if that's okay. So this review really, as you can see, is the picture of the location of the warehouse, the Murphy Warehouse. Some of you will recall, and some of you will be new to this, but the university acquired this property at the end of 2015. In mid-2018 and in early 2019, the university received 2 unsolicited letters of interest to purchase the property. As a result of that private sector interest and the need for significant investment in the property, from our perspective to maintain the property, the university issued an RFP in mid-2019 to determine whether a sale could be in the best interest of the university. After considerable deliberation, the board voted to approve the sale to Ryan Companies at the March 2020 meeting. Unfortunately, as a result of the COVID change in economic situations, and the Ryan Companies terminated its purchase agreement during its period of due diligence with the university, and that sale was terminated. In January of this year, the University Real Estate Office sought a new buyer from the pool of previously interested parties that responded to the RFP. After a careful evaluation of the proposals, Eagle Ridge Partners LLC was selected as the preferred buyer, and a new purchase and sale agreement has been negotiated and is in front of the board today for review and for approval in June. I do want to mention that for purposes of the record, that on May 16th, the university received a new offer for the property from the Murphy family that the board has received a copy. The administration has not had an opportunity to evaluate this new offer, but we will comment on it at the June board meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice President Krueger to walk through the presentation. If that's okay, Mr. Chair.
It is. Proceed. Thank you.
Chair McMillan, members of the committee, 701 24th Avenue Southeast is located south of Elm Street and west of 24th Avenue Southeast, across the BNSF and Union Pacific Railroad tracks and yards from the east bank of the Twin Cities campus, as shown on this map. Next slide, please. Next. Thank you. The property is 21.68 acres and includes 38 interconnected building sections totaling 706,029 square feet that have been constructed between 1902 and 1977. The property, as Senior Vice President Franz noted, the property was purchased from the Murphy Warehouse Company on December 21st, 2015 for $17,975,000. To the extent that the fair market value of the property at the time of the purchase exceeded the purchase price, Murphy Warehouse Company intended the excess would be a donation to the university. Murphy Warehouse Company's qualified appraiser estimated the value of the donation to be $2,325,000. As part of the purchase and sale agreement, the university agreed to provide the Murphy Warehouse Company with a receipt and an acknowledgement on IRS Form 8283 non-cash charitable contributions. As part of the acknowledgement on this form, the university affirmed that in the event the university would dispose of the property within 3 years after the date of the receipt, the university would file an updated Form 8282 donee information return. The 3-year anniversary of the transaction passed at the end of 2018, and there was no gift agreement with the foundation. Accordingly, the university no longer has any continuing tax or legal obligations tied to this charitable donation of the Murphy Warehouse Company. Next slide, please. The site continues to serve as the headquarters for Murphy Warehouse Company, a full-service public warehousing and contract logistics services company. At the close of our purchase, the university and Murphy Warehouse Company entered into a 10-year leaseback, initially covering 663,630 square feet of building space. The lease included provisions for both parties to terminate blocks of space within the leased premises. Murphy has opted to terminate blocks of space on a few occasions, starting early in 2016. The company currently leases 392,300 square feet from the university. The site also houses the university bookstore warehouse operations and some other university departmental storage. There are plans to add an additional 14,000 square feet to the university storage component to accommodate an NSF grant recently awarded to LACOR, a division of Earth and Environmental Sciences, in order to expand their core sample repository. The older brick buildings that front along Elm Street, as shown in this photo in the slides, are vacant, and as are the upper floors of the buildings immediately to the south. Following Murphy's termination of those blocks of space in 2016, the university determined that the facilities could not be reused until additional structural shoring was installed. This structural analysis, as well as other facilities condition information, was shared with all interested parties prior to them submitting proposals for acquisition. Next slide, please. Just as with property acquisitions, we start by asking the question, what is the strategic value to the university for this property disposition? Could you adjust? Thank you. Since the acquisition in 2015, we have refined our campus growth and investment plans, and we have identified a higher and better use of our capital investments. The university initially considered this purchase as an opportunity to land bank the property for the future. In 2016, the board endorsed the Twin Cities Development Framework and the Southeast Gateway District Plan that focused our long-term efforts on the reinvestment in the campus core and strategic expansion in the Southeast Gateway area. And as a result, we have recently made several real estate acquisitions to advance this plan. In addition, at the time of acquisition, the university identified the site for a new library collections facility. During pre-design for this facility, it was determined that the existing warehouses were not suitable. The structural capacity and the climate controls required for the storage of books would have necessitated the construction of essentially a new building within one of the current structures. This was both cost prohibitive and not a wise investment for a 40-plus-year-old building. And finally, the carrying costs for the property are significant. Since acquisition, the university has invested almost $1 million to address known fire code issues. The facility needs significant additional basic infrastructure investments, such as sprinkler system improvements, roof repairs, and structural improvements to the older buildings at the front of the complex. Selling the property at this time will avoid these costs, as well as many millions of dollars of other infrastructure costs long-term. Next slide, please. And now for the transaction itself. In February 2019, the university began to explore the disposition of the property per university administrative policy. This included declaring the property as surplus, offering it for sale to the city, county, and the state, and then offering it for sale through a public RFP process, as Senior Vice President Franz noted. 5 proposals were received, and after careful evaluation by the university, Ryan Companies was selected as the preferred buyer. And then, as noted previously, in December, Ryan Companies exercised its contractual obligation to terminate the purchase agreement, due again primarily to changes in the office market. After Ryan terminated the purchase agreement, the university sought a new buyer from the pool of previously interested parties, and after careful evaluation of the proposals, Eagle Ridge Partners LLC was selected as the preferred buyer, negotiating a purchase and sale agreement more favorable to the university than the original Ryan purchase agreement. Eagle Ridge Partners LLC is a privately held development, acquisition, and asset management company that has acquired over 6 million square feet and has developed an additional 1.9 million square feet of office and industrial space within its 16-year history. The new purchase and sale price is $22.2 million, including $200,000 of earnest money. And as previously noted, the university provided all interested parties detailed facilities condition information prior to request for proposals so that they could incorporate this information into their proposed purchase price. The university is not required to make any of the immediate repairs needed prior to the sale. The buyer is to assume the existing lease with the Murphy Warehouse Company, and the sale is conditioned upon the buyer and the university executing a new lease for the university to occupy space in the facility. During the due diligence period, the university and the buyer will negotiate a mutually acceptable lease back to the university, including at least the following terms. 1, an initial term of 60 to 72 months with multiple options for renewal, extending for up to an additional 20 years to accommodate the LACOR grant. 2, the university may lease from Eagle Ridge up to 50,000 square feet of space commencing upon the closing date. And 3, a gross annual rent of $7 per square foot for the lease premises with annual percentage increases equivalent to the consumer price index. However, if the lease premises under one of the lease agreements is modified to include the installation of a walk-in cooler facility, as anticipated by the LACOR improvements, then the lease would allow for separate metering of the utilities to be paid by the university and a gross annual rent of $6 per square foot plus those separately metered utilities. The administration believes that this leaseback of this a limited amount of space, which is less than 10% of the total property area, on these terms helps the university meet its need for storage space near campus without taking on the long-term costs associated with continuing to own the larger property. The due diligence period will be 90 days after Board of Regents approval, with closing to occur on or before the 5th business day after the expiration of the due diligence period. And with that, we conclude the presentation and stand for questions. Thank you, Chair McMillan and members of the committee.
All right, thank you, Vice President Krieger, and thank you, Senior Vice President Franz, for your framing remarks at the beginning. I we'll open this up to, I've got my own views about it, but I will say this, I believe that the board is properly in the space of conversations around land banking, where we should land bank, what we should land bank. I hesitate very much to put the board and this committee into the middle of a commercial negotiation and to step in front of what is and has been a properly executed process to date. I know the Murphy family has sent an offer, and I don't believe the appropriate use of the board's time is to step in and become the negotiators of that. We need to leave that to the administration. That's my perspective, but that's a process comment, and why don't I open it up for committee input? I'll look for hands. Regent Kenyanya, I see yours first. You have the screen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation, AVP Kruger. I have a couple of questions. And the first is, how much debt service is remaining on the property? And I don't know if I missed that in the presentation, but how much debt service do we have remaining? And then just some comparison on the rent we're collecting, comparison between the rent we're collecting, the payments we have to make on the debt service, and then how much rent we would pay if we were to sell and do a lease back. I hope that's all kind of making sense. Just trying to understand, how those numbers compare. And especially with I think you mentioned that the bookstore is looking to occupy an additional amount there, right? So what does the rent look like versus the rent we're getting now? And then how much do we have left on the debt service?
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Vice President Krieger.
I am going to have to, Regent McMillan, Chair McMillan, Regent Kenyanya, I'm going to have to do some calculations for you on that. And so if we could continue some of the conversations, and I will get back to you on some of those key questions.
All right, I saw Regent Rocha's hand go up as well. Regent Rocha.
Regent Kenyanya, were you done?
Yeah, I will happily await those numbers.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I might be wrong on this, but Regent McMillan, I think that we might be the two remaining members of the board that were part of the board in 2015 when this purchase was made. And there's a lot here. I'm a bit off balance by not having those numbers, Vice President Kruger. Trying to set this up kind of where I think the board's role is there's a few things going on here. I was obviously quite surprised. I don't know that we've ever had property that was declared surplus that we're using before in being part of facilities for quite some time. It was always land that had not been touched by the university for a significant amount of time. And we oftentimes do hold, I know we'll have on our consent agenda here a little bit, a purchase of property in Rochester that will be cleared and will hold until it's time for its development. But I think that this is really an important dialogue. I mean, I think there's several things going on. Part of it is short-term versus long-term interest of the university. I think there's short-term versus long-term economic result. I think there's also donor relations involved. I don't find myself in alignment with the perspective that any no longer a legal obligation under the substantial contribution from the Murphys, that ends our obligations under the relationship with somebody that's provided a substantial amount of money. And I think that their intent in doing that is still relevant today. I think it'll be relevant 20 years from now, as we see in many long-term and significant contributions from individuals and groups to the University of Minnesota. For me, it's pretty simple. I think even now when we do the economic analysis, you take the income from the lease plus the value of our use, which I think we can sort of ballpark at about 350 grand a year, because that's what we're ultimately going to have to pay if the lease is as described. And again, it's not complete yet. So we don't actually even know what the real purchase price is, because the cost and value of that lease will dictate what our actual purchase price is. And I think it's sort of odd that we'd be asked to make a decision before actually knowing what those terms are. And I would expect that lease would come back before the board, because that many months, that many years at that rate would certainly exceed $1 million. And I don't want it to be perceived that this will obviate our oversight over that contract. But if we were to proceed, but my expectation or my estimation is that if we consider our expenses on maintaining this property, it's something in the range of $700,000 a year, which I think is very generous. And Senior Vice President Franz and I have had some dialogue. I've asked a number of questions. I've gotten answers to some of them. Some of them I'm still waiting on, and some I will refine further. But much of what we're considering expenses on this are actually payments back to the university. Or, I haven't been able to track down that we've retained additional personnel or anything. So when based on a sale, some of the costs reflected as being attached to this property, we will still have those costs. They don't go away. So there's no savings from that. So really it's the money that we would save as an outlay against the income that we receive on this. But if we're receiving something in the $1.3 million range on the lease from the Murphy Company, and even if we have $1 million debt service payment at a very good interest rate, that leaves us with a surplus of a few $100,000 or a couple $100,000 at least. Then you add on top of that, we aren't paying anybody for $350,000 worth of storage for the bookstore, let alone the opportunity for expansion, not just for the bookstore, but for other storage uses. And I would point out the library collections facilities was never mentioned as part of the docket process when we bought it. It's part of a general concept of being able to consolidate storage to add more space for other units, which of course we would lose with the sale of this property. But if you take a $1.3 million lease payment, you subtract a 1 to 1.1 debt service payment, you add the $350,000 in constructive use from the bookstore space, and then subtract even accepting all of the claims that of the asserted expenses, again, a huge portion which will not be saved by a sale. That would mean that maybe the university is outlaying something in the range of $400,000, something in there. But we're gaining $1 million in equity every year. So I would ask every member of this board, if I offered you an opportunity to put $400 in a bucket and get $1,000 at the end of the year, you'd do it in a heartbeat. I don't know that we have any other investments that are giving us that kind of a return, plus the increased value of the property over time. And that's not even calculating the incredible value of having this amount of land available for things that we will have developing in the future to future boards of regents. In 2015, when I made this vote, my intent was that in our landlocked circumstance on the Minneapolis campus, the Twin Cities campus, this gave us opportunities that once it's gone forever. And our job as members of this board is not just to deal with a few dollars and cents here. And by the way, we're not making any money on the sale if we sell it. We're only converting equity into cash, which we could do by selling any of our investments. This is an equitable value right now that I think that we should have. But we as a board have the long term, 100, 200 years from now, just as the people who started this university had. That should be of the utmost interest to us. So I'm going to ask additional questions about some of the financial considerations to get those. Again, I'm very surprised that we're in a review discussion of a $20+ million sale, but we don't know the answers to what the lease rate is, what the debt service rate is. But I believe we should get that information. We should have a better understanding of where our actual outlays have been, so we understand what the cost of retaining it is. Compare that against our equitable gain, which will greatly exceed whatever we're expending. I'm absolutely confident of that. And then talk about what our obligation is to the future of the board to have these resources available to us. Again, we have no reason to sell it right now. There's nothing that's compelling us to sell it right now. But But if any of you are even contemplating this as a wise decision on behalf of the university for the long term, we should at least know what all those dollars and cents are before we make that decision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Regent Mayeron.
I don't have my hand up. If I do, it's by mistake.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking at the, I've got Regent Swigum first and then Regent Davenport.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like Regent Davenport to go first, to let her go first.
All right, Regent Davenport, you get to go first.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. And it's probably a good follow-up to my colleagues, Rosha and Kenyanya, in my trying to reconcile this balance sheet. And I'm thinking about, in line with the previous questions, comments, but including the cost of repairs, safety, the costs retaining this building over time. And I know that was in some of our earlier materials, but also the thought about maintaining the property, but demolition, but that's fairly costly too. So maybe this goes into this spreadsheet concept, unless there's VP Franz, if there's some comments about general costs in maintaining this building, if we were to do that over the years, the cost benefit.
Thank you, Regent Davenport, and I will go back to Vice President Franz at this point, but yeah, let's just go there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Regent Davenport, and thanks for all the questions. I think one of the things that you, in any real estate transaction like this and an investment like this, you have to consider the situation. And obviously the situation has changed from what it was in 2015. In 2015, the view of that investment was viewed positively, in part because of the idea of the bookstore potential storage opportunity, and the idea of land banking, and also, thinking that this facility would provide some rather inexpensive warehousing opportunities. But I think one of the things that we've learned over the years, and it's our obligation to come to you with new developments and new ideas, and that is that the library collections facility, as we've started analyzing more in depth what that's going to require, it's clear that this facility cannot meet those needs. You cannot refit these old warehouses to provide a modern collections facility for the kind of collections that we have at the university. So that potential use is not there. The other thing that we need to look at is the commitment to growing in the East Gateway, as Vice President Kruger mentioned. We have limited resources, and we need to make sure we deploy those resources in a strategically responsible way. And it's true that you can sell other assets to generate this money, but if we don't need this asset for university functions ongoing in a way that really support the mission and the direction of where we want to go as a university, then it's our recommendation that we get out of this investment and use those proceeds in further opportunities such as in the East Gateway or other ones. But the other thing too is the carrying cost. Now we'll put together some more information for the board as requested, and I certainly appreciate those questions, and we'll put together some more information. But I think one of the things that if you've gone through that facility, you know that it's in need of updating, and we've already had to spend over $1 million on fire code issues over the period of years, and there's more investment that needs to be made to maintain this. So whenever you're looking at an investment like this, in my point of view, Regent Davenport, you have to look at the carrying costs and whether it's worth those additional carrying costs going forward. And we, as I mentioned, we've got limited resources, and it's our recommendation that these resources could be better employed in a more strategic way in another process. So that's just kind of my kind of global take. We'll have more information for you, Regent Davenport, as you requested. But I hope that answered some of your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Regent Swigum, are you ready to go, or do you want to defer? Because I've got Regent Powell as well.
I'm very, very fine with Regent Davenport going before me. I am not so fine with Regent Powell going before me. Mr. Chairman, if I could, Leslie, just for the public record, I know that this is in our agenda. It's in our notes under the mission fulfillment, or under the FIN meeting here. But could you just give me just the two numbers for the public record? I just simply want the number that's needed for yearly maintenance costs of this facility and the number that is needed for long-term capital investments, and a close enough for government work number. Give me those two numbers just for the public record, please.
Vice President Krieger.
Chair McMillan, Regent Swigum. And so we have estimated that the immediate costs for infrastructure are in the $3 to $6 million range of issues such as our sprinkler system upgrades, the structural repairs, and the roof replacements that we need to do. Those are in the $3 to $6 million range. Long-term, we have estimated those deferred maintenance costs in the $20 to $40 million range over years 6 to 19, if we were to retain the building for a 20-year time period. From the standpoint of our estimates in terms of our pro forma, we estimate we are operating at about a $600,000 operating loss right now, based upon the $1.3 million of rent that we receive from the Murphy Warehouse Company. But in terms of the amount that we then pay related to debt service, insurance, and operating costs, we're operating at about a $600,000 a year loss. I will also respond to Regent Kenyania's question that the debt service we have remaining on the property is just over $13 million. Does that answer your questions, Regent Swigum?
Yes, for the record, thank you, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chairman, Leslie, I appreciate those numbers. Sooner or later, members, colleagues, $600,000 loss a year, 20 to 30 million of capital investment and infrastructure. Sooner or later, it becomes real money. I mean, it gets to be a lot of money at some time or another. And I think Vice President Franz correctly stated that these dollars are in competition with other needs that we have right now, real needs that we have. Members, I'm going to tell you that I have been negligent. When this came before us a year and a half ago, I have not visited Murphy Properties. I have not been there and seen it with my own eyes. And I've asked Vice President Franz to take myself within the next month before we take action on this item. And Mr. Franz, when we set up the date for you and I to go, I hope that you would maybe let all our other colleagues on the Board of Regents know in case they could join us. And if we can safely get across those railroad tracks, I look forward to seeing the property with my own eyes and improving the negligence that I've had in the past.
Thank you. I'm glad to do that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. On to Regent Powell.
Just a few comments, Chair. Thank you. It just strikes me that this is a very limited use piece of property, located as it is, behind and adjacent to a major railway interchange, and its use really is as storage. For that use, it is hugely oversized for what we would ever need, and it's going to be very expensive for all the reasons that you've heard, the carrying costs. These are very old buildings that are going to require investment. And so I'm very much of the view that we have higher priorities, that the Eagle Ridge offer is a really good offer, and that we would be well served by getting out of this one. And so I look forward to seeing the detailed spreadsheet. But I just think that this is a very, very large industrial space with limited use for us, and we don't need it.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Regent, continuing on with regents who haven't had a chance to speak yet. We're running out of time here too, folks. We have action items on the consent agenda, but I'm going to go to Regent Verhalen.
Thanks, and I hope my questions are quick. This is somewhat of a matter of, not being a part of those prior conversations in 2015, and then the last time this came before the board. And thank you, Chair McMillan, for the opportunity. In going back through the documents, even going back to the 2015, and I think this goes to Regent Roche's point, the proposal discusses storage for the bookstore and potential storage for the geology department. But I've heard as part of these discussions today that the determination was made it wasn't appropriate for library storage. And so I'm trying to understand the lineage between those two uses, library storage, and then where we got today. And if I may, just for the sake of time, the second question I have is, in those 2015 documents, when this was first presented, the statement was that the leases collected would cover the maintenance of the facility. And is it an issue of more maintenance was identified than the university thought would be necessary to maintain the Murphy Warehouse facility, or is there some other disconnect there that I've just not put together in the documents we were given? Thank you.
Vice President Krieger, do you want to tackle those questions from Regent Verhalen?
Regent McMillan, Regent Verhalen, thank you. I'll start with the second question you asked in terms of the anticipated rent covering our operating costs back in 2015. You may recall in my presentation, I noted that the original square footage leased by the Murphy Warehouse Company when we signed the purchase agreement back in 2015 was in excess of 600,000 square feet. They now currently lease 392,000 square feet. So they exercise, the initial rent from the Murphy Warehouse Company was over $2 million per year. And that about a month after we closed on the property, they provided their first 6-month notice of termination on about 150,000 square feet. And then another 100,000 square feet was terminated shortly thereafter. So in 2016, we lost about 250,000 square feet of rentable area, which reduced the rental payments by Murphy Company. And so we are operating in that, we do have that operating loss now. In terms of your first question regarding the library collections facility, part of the purchase and sale, the original purchase and sale agreement contemplated the university's ability to terminate a portion of the Murphy leased premises for our purposes for the contemplated library collection facility if we provided them a 6-month notice. And so the purchase and sale agreement contemplated that and addressed that issue. And it was a defined square footage and a defined portion of the facility that was under consideration for the planned library collections facility. Following the acquisition of the property, as we continue to go through the pre-design process, that is when we discovered that the environmental controls required for that library collections facility, the books, the humidity and HVAC controls, as well as the structural reinforcements and the flooring changes that would need to be made in order to accommodate the stacks for that library collections facility. That's when the university determined as part of that pre-design process that we would have essentially had to build a new building within the current facility and made the determination that it was cost prohibitive. So we have never terminated that portion. We have never exercised that option in our lease.
Very good. Thank you, Vice President Krieger. Regent Verhalen, I think she got to the issues you had asked. If not, let me know. Regents Rocha and Kenyanya, I do see your hands, but I continue to have other regents who haven't had a chance to speak yet. So I'm going to go to Regent Mayeron. And at some point here, I'm going to move forward and move on.
Just a quick question, in terms of the offer that's been made by Eagle Ridge Partners for the $22 million, is that a cash offer or is that going to be financed or what?
Vice President Krieger.
Regent McMillan, Regent Mayron, that is cash at closing.
Thank you. That's my only question.
All right, if I'm going to go back to Regent Kenyanya because I think he's had a question answered that may have spurred another one for him.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had kind of a half turn earlier there. Yeah, I mean, you know, the first time this came around, I did actually support the resolution, but even then it was close. And I think there's good points being made either way. And that's why I kind of find it a little challenging on this one. Regent Swiggum mentioned visiting the property, and you know, I too hadn't done that. And actually, that I a while back I had my COVID shot by this little healthcare system called mHealth Fairview, and the place they were doing it is actually right next. I don't think it's on the property, but just adjacent on Kasota Avenue there. So you know, when I left, you know, I kind of drove around and took a look at it, and just personally for me, it's the size of it and the breadth of it, you know, I just kind of go back to what Regent Rocha was saying. Could there be a future use? And the current benefit of selling it seems, I mean, there's a benefit, sure, you could argue that, but it just seems marginal compared to what a future use could be, especially for an urban dense campus. You know, we talked about you know, our need for green space during our master planning conversation. We obviously this wouldn't be that, but you know, if you can alleviate certain use in the campus core in terms of storage and other things, I just feel like there may be opportunities. And then and lastly, I think I may have heard this incorrectly, but when that number about the operating loss was given, and again, this may be my mistake, the rent that the bookstore would then pay wasn't factored into that either. So I could be wrong about that, but I just think the benefit, if you think there is one, may be marginal compared to what this could do for the university in the future. Perhaps this is the land banking we're talking about, but just wanted to close out my comments there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice President Krieger, any clarity around the economics as it relates to a future lease that we would have for a small portion of the space? I think that's been factored into your analysis, but several regents have questioned whether it is.
Chair McMillan, Regent Kenyanya, the bookstores currently pays as an auxiliary, currently pays a occupancy charge for their space. And again, the 50,000 square feet is the total number of square footage, not only for the bookstore, but also for some of the other departmental storage that currently exist, and then the anticipated LACOR space. So we would envision a couple of 2 to 3 different leases that we would be entering into with Eagle Ridge that accommodate up to 50,000 square feet at that $7 or $6 a square foot gross lease rate. And so if you do estimate it at about $350,000 a year, that is a little bit more, but comparable to what some of those uses are currently paying for their space now.
Okay, thank you. I see another hand of a regent that hasn't spoke yet, and then I'm going to come back to you, Regent Rocha, but please be prepared to be concise. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really briefly jumping in here before we conclude. I just wanted to say I appreciate the comments made by Regent Kenyanya and Regent Rocha about opportunity. I actually have toured the property back in 2019 along with some student government colleagues, albeit in a very different context than I am now. So I look forward to hopefully being able to attend the tour schedule permitting that's being arranged by Senior Vice President Franz. I think I think the opportunity in terms of a long range view is important to consider. I do look forward to receiving some of those numbers that we've been talking about, or just being able to look at this a little bit more in the next month here as we do our due diligence period. But just wanted to say that, especially in the context of our discussions around Twin Cities campus master planning right now, I'm very sensitive to the points made by colleagues around long-term opportunity for this property. So thanks again, Mr. Chair, for letting me briefly jump in here.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Rocha?
Regent Rocha, you're muted.
I thought must have remuted myself. Sorry about that. A few moments ago, you stated that this was not a useful property to us to use it as storage as such, but that's precisely why we made this decision in 2015 December. And on top of that, I find some of the expenses that are now being identified. First of all, the investments that were just described a little bit ago would expand the usable space. I'm really surprised if this wasn't something that was known to the administration when it gave its recommendation at that point for us to acquire the property. But looking at it, even since we've had the property, we've gained almost $9 million in equity. If you look at what the sales price is, $9 million, and it's about 6.5, a little more than 6.5 if you don't include the gift from the Murphy company. And so, this is not money out the door by any measure. And the majority of the money that's being identified as expenses are expenses that we pay to ourselves. Our payments to third parties, to people outside of the university, are not nearly as large as that number that was just cited a moment ago. But even if we say that our cost is $600,000 over the income as it is right now, and you consider the amount of that actually is paid back to the university itself, which just goes away upon the sale. Once this is sold, we're going to be paying $350,000, and this goes to Regent Sviggum. You talk about $600,000 is real money. Right now, even if you say it's $600,000, we're gaining $1 million in equity every year. When that $13 million is paid off, this thing is going to be a net cash flow. It's going to benefit us. If we chose to sell other assets and pay off the $13 million, we'd be making money on this property every year. And as well as being able to expand our storage, preserve other space on campus, and move forward that way. So it makes no financial sense at all to sell it, to be paying $350,000 plus. We're going to be on a limited lease at that point because we don't own the property. Once that lease expires, now where do we go? And I would encourage everyone to go take a look at the property. The bookstore space, if you talk to the folks in the warehouse, they're cramped. They'd like more space, especially as online becomes a greater portion of what they're able to do. But at any rate, I look forward to the better data. But the fact is, we are making money on this property every year. And we are also preserving the opportunity to improve our other space on campus and to make important decisions in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Regent Rocha. Let me see if I can wrap up and then we can move on to the action items in the consent agenda. You're correct, Regent Rocha. You and I are the only two remaining members of the board. From 2015, I had the pleasure of serving as chair of the facilities committee at that time, and a very active time. We had a lot going on. I tend to look at this as the outcome of a arm's length negotiation of a commercial deal. And yes, there was a gift in the form of a potentially below market purchase by the university, but there was no donation, no involvement of the university foundation, and a very clear set of provisions written into this that benefited both sides, primarily the Murphys, but we had the right, and they fully understood that at the end of a 3-year period, we might not have realized the opportunities we wanted. We might not have been able to do what it was we thought we could do with that property. We might have found out that the investments needed for life, safety, and health were very consequential and very large, that continuing to offer a substantially below market lease opportunity for the only good space there, which is what the Murphys have kept, and the rest of the space has been turned back to us, producing no rent and making the current economics of the deal pretty much completely underwater. We retained the right to sell the property. So I just reject out of hand the idea that somehow we are violating donor intent or that we're doing something inconsistent with what it was the Murphys and the university did in that negotiated transaction some 6 years ago. I appreciate the donation that occurred in terms of value below a appraisal, but I don't know whether that's really market. I don't know what market was at the time. What I know is today we can't use the space for what we wanted, and the space that we actually have that isn't being used by Murphy is unusable and requires a vast amount of money to be invested to ever make it usable. The long-term economics of this deal only makes sense if we land bank it. And if we land bank it, then we probably aren't going to invest in the facilities and expand the lease and turn it into a money-making proposition that would overcome the debt service and everything else that goes with it. And very importantly, members of the board and of this committee, we have redirected the university administration's priorities for land banking to the southeast side of the campus and to the East Gateway side of the opportunity. The foundation's pursuing the latter. Our own people are pursuing land banking to the best of their ability in a very constrained market in that southeast piece where the medical enterprise is hopefully going to be. So I think both parties to this transaction have exercised their rights under the deal cut in 2015. It has not panned out as we might have hoped. The Murphys have continued to benefit from a below market lease, and we're at a decision point with a ready, willing, and able buyer. And I think that's where we stand today. And I don't really know from a legal standpoint or a process standpoint what to make of the Murphys' additional offer. Seems we may need some legal guidance there, because I know we have a deal cut with a party that the Eagle Ridge partners, and we need to be careful we don't tread on that either in the process of evaluating what it is the Murphys have now put on the table in addition to whatever they had on the table when the RFP process concluded in round 2. So a lot of ground to cover here. We've got a month ahead of us. Appreciate the dialogue, and we'll move on. And I would expect the administration will be bolstering the record, so to speak, so that when we get to June, we can make a well-informed decision. And again, I'll close where I started, and that is the dialogue about land banking is precisely where this board should weigh in. But it seems to me, in my view, we've pretty clearly told the administration to put your resources in the southeast and the east portion of the property, not the northern side of the campus, across the great divide of an active railroad track and sitting between that and a high voltage line. So it's a challenging space, but that's a great place for the board to debate. And we'll move on in June. With that, I'm going to call us on to the consent agenda.
Chair McMillan?
Yes, Mr. Langworth.
Do you want to circle back to Associate Vice President Tonneson real quick for that question on the auxiliary?
Thank you, Jason. I almost forgot. So at just before our unprecedented break, I had cut off Regent Mayeron's second part of her question relative to the auxiliary and athletic totals. So I see Julie teed up here. There she is, right on the lower left corner of the screen, my screen anyway. Why don't you take a moment before we jump into the consent report and our action items and come back to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Mayeron, the answer to your question, which was of the 130 million projected shortfall, what's the split between athletics and the other auxiliaries? And the answer is roughly 1/3 of that 130 million or 45 million is the athletics projected shortfall right now. The 2/3 is the auxiliaries, most of that being the Twin Cities. I mean, 68 million of that being the Twin Cities. That's the split. The only thing I will add to that is that they are both working, all of those organizations have been working very hard this year to reduce their shortfall and thus reduce the loan that might be necessary.
Good. Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. All right, on to item 6, and we're getting pretty distantly over our time frame here. But I know we've got mission fulfillment this afternoon. So there's one action item on our consent report today, but at the outset, I want to make sure people understand our Board of Region policies, especially those that aren't familiar with the consent report, makes it okay to ask a question about any item on the consent report without having to pull it from the consent report first. It's always okay to ask to pull an item, but if you're not sure, ask a question at the outset about any individual items you might have, and then we can take the time to figure out if we want to vote on them as a block or if we want to pull something out. So just please let me know or Mr. Langworthy know if there's something that you'd like to raise or you have a question about as you inform a decision on whether to vote with these items as a whole or to pull anything out. So I'm going to look to Jason to help me figure out who has comments, questions, requests to single something out. And while we do that, Senior Vice President Franz, maybe you can summarize what's in the consent report.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, I just drank water down the wrong way, so apologize. So if I fall out of the screen, call 911, please. So first of all, on the Central Reserve contingency allocation, there are no items under this that require approval that were beyond the $250,000 limit that weren't already approved as part of a budget. On the purchase of goods and services over $1 million, we have 7 items that are in your report that are for your review and approval at this meeting. We do have an employment agreement that is also included in your report for Mr. Joe Rossi, Defensive Coordinator. We have a resolution related to the issuance of debt that we need to pass in order to take advantage of the opportunity for the state that will allow us to issue new debt and use that savings from refunding some previous debt and using that savings to help defer the cost of the clinical research facility. We have 3 real estate transactions, one in Rochester, one in over at Fairview Riverside area, relocation of an office, and then an easement over in the Cleveland Avenue of the St. Paul campus. We have the schematic design for the Biomade facility that we talked about earlier. There's a picture of the facility, although it's still in early phases. And we also have the extension of the principles for allocating federal COVID-19 relief funds that Vice President Tonneson talked about earlier in terms of being able to utilize those new federal funds according to federal law. And then we have approval for an underwriting investment banking services related to issuing new debt and doing this refunding that I mentioned. And those are the items on the consent report, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. I'm scanning my screen here and checking with Mr. Langworthy to see if anybody has questions, wants to make comments, or requesting an item be singled out. Regent Swigum, does that just your hand wave? I don't see your raised hand feature up, so. Okay. I don't see anybody. Mr. Langworthy, anybody asking to single anything out?
I don't see anything, Chair McMillan.
All right, well then I would entertain a motion from a committee member to approve the consent report.
Move to approve.
Very
Second.
good. Thank you, Regent Davenport, and I heard a second there, I think, from Regent Powell. Further discussion on the consent report before the Finance and Ops Committee, if approved, would go to the full final action. No discussion. Mr. Langworthy, why don't you call the roll? I know you've been itching to call a roll today, so.
Yes, indeed. On the motion to recommend approval of the consent report, Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Farnsworth.
Yes.
Regent Farnsworth votes yes. Regent Her is absent. Regent Hipsch.
Yes.
Regent Hipsch votes yes. Regent Johnson.
Yes.
Regent Johnson votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent Verhalen.
Yes.
Regent Verhalen votes yes. Chair McMillan.
Yes.
Chair McMillan votes yes. Chair McMillan, there are 11 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 1 absent.
All right, the consent agenda is approved by this committee on an 11-0 vote, which brings us to the final item of the day, or the final item of the morning, now afternoon, is information items. Senior VP Franz, anything you want to highlight for us before we break?
Senior Vice President Franz, you're muted.
Oh dear, yes. Mr. Chair, Interim Vice President Horstman would like to mention one item, the revised annual report on faculty compensation. Otherwise, the reports are fairly self-explanatory now, and if it's okay with you, I'll let Interim Vice President Horstman go. Is that all right?
Please, Vice President Horstman, we've missed you.
Thank you, Chair McMillan and Senior Vice President Franz. As you may recollect, those of you that were at the February meeting, we had a brief discussion on the Duluth faculty compensation benchmarking in regard to the fact that one peer institution had entered quite different data than what had been entered in previous years. And that had caused the ratio to the market for Duluth to increase significantly. We did note that in the February meeting as likely not being correct. Since that time, and I'd like to thank UEA representatives for the great collaboration on this. We've reviewed it with UEA. We've looked at the data, and the peer institution has updated their entry for correct information. And as indicated in February, the new amended report that's in your information item today does reflect an accurate ratio to the market of 85%, much like the prior year. So thank you for your time on that correction point.
And thank you, Interim Vice President Horstman, for following up on that key item. Okay, there's no additional business before the committee, so we stand adjourned. And before I let everyone go, it's a 2 o'clock start again for mission fulfillment, correct, Mr. Langworthy?
That is correct, Chair McMillan.
Very good. We're signing off. See you in an hour and 10 minutes.